Chapter 2494. I Ching Song was stunned. Brother Wu, don't forget, he is the sect leader of the Flying Heaven faction. Meng Jing said solemnly. He's the sect master, and you're also the sect master, so you can't mix public and private matters. If that's the case, I Ching Song frowned. Then why do we have to be careful of sect leader Wu? Speaking of which, we are still opponents, Meng Jing said slowly. All the factions are our opponents, except for the dancing butterfly faction. I Ching Song was surprised. Why? Every sect leader has a mission, to unify the realm of heavenly demons. Meng Jing said. I Ching Song's eyes widened. Unify the realm of heavenly demons. Meng Jing scoffed. Why? Can't we do it? I think we once unified the realm of heavenly demons. I Ching Song asked. That's right, Meng Jing said. Since the ancestors could do it, why can't we? Plus, we have a golden opportunity. Arcane territory? I Ching Song asked. Meng Jing nodded. Arcane territory? I Ching Song listened attentively. Meng Jing said. The arcane territory was created by the Heavenly Wind faction. This is a great opportunity for them. If they can make use of it, unifying the realm of heavenly demons will not be a dream. I Ching Song frowned. What about us? This is also our chance. Meng Jing said. The sect leader has gone in to investigate and obtain some rare herbs, but it is far from enough. To truly unify the realm of heavenly demons, we must first break the roots of the Heavenly Wind faction, then replace them with new ones to make the arcane territory ours. Good idea. I Ching Song nodded. Good idea, but it is not easy to do. Meng Jing said. There are two obstacles. 1. Is sect leader Wu? I Ching Song asked. Meng Jing said slowly. 1 is Wu Unc, and the other is the old monsters of the Heavenly Wind faction. Sect leader Cheng once plotted to make them fight each other. He wanted both sides to be injured, and then he could take the opportunity to eliminate them. Then, the rise of the Great Dream faction would be unstoppable. I Ching Song frowned. As far as he knew, Wu Unc and Sect Master Cheng had a very good relationship. Although they had fought over the divine demon herb, they still appreciated each other's talents. He didn't expect that Wu Unc would be so cunning and scheming against him. Meng Jing said, Is it because you feel that sect leader Cheng is being too unreasonable? A little, I Ching Song said embarrassedly. Sigh. Meng Jing shook his head and said, This is why sect leader Cheng is so admirable. In order to realize his long-cherished wish of unifying the heavenly demon realm, he sacrificed everything he had. I Ching Song said, Does sect master Wu know about this? Wu Unc is also a smart man. Meng Jing snorted and said, although he was very honest with sect leader Cheng, he would never let his guard down. I Ching Song asked, Elder Meng suspects that sect leader Cheng was killed by him. I don't think so. Meng Jing shook his head and said, He won't kill sect leader Cheng, but I don't know if he'll use someone else to do his dirty work, as sect leader Cheng and I have discussed. Did he also borrow the saber of the Tianfeng sect? I Ching Song asked. Meng Jing nodded and said, Even if you plot against others, it doesn't mean that others won't plot against you. Then, I Ching Song frowned. In the end, he still didn't say anything important. It was just a suspicion, and it was impossible to prove it. Wu Unc was extremely intelligent and meticulous. How could he leave a flaw in his story? Just pretend that you don't know. Meng Jing sighed and said, Even if he used someone else to do his dirty work, there's no way to take revenge on him. After all, it was the Tianfeng sect that did it. Sect leader Cheng can only blame himself for being careless. Is there a way to deal with him? I Ching Song asked. Originally, we discussed with sect leader Cheng that we can't do it ourselves, as Wu Unc's martial arts are too strong. Meng Jing snorted and said, Now, we'll use this method and wait for Wu Unc to fight to the death with the Tianfeng sect. I'm afraid the disciples won't agree to it if we wait for the opportunity. I Ching Song sighed. Meng Jing said calmly, Sect leader, you should go into seclusion to accept the inheritance. It won't be too late to come out when the matter between Wu Unc and the Tianfeng sect is resolved. All right, I Ching Song nodded slowly. Although he felt that he had let his good friend down, when he recalled that it was Wu Yunci who had snatched his divine demon herb, his guilt dissipated. The divine demon herb was related to whether or not one could cultivate the sect's mental cultivation method to perfection and ascend. Once one ascended, one would gain 10,000 years of lifespan. Becoming a sect leader did not mean that one could ascend. Sect leader Chung was an example. However, if one obtained the divine demon herb, there was a high chance that one could ascend. This loss and gain made one's heart ache, so it was reasonable for him to play tricks on Wu Yuanci. Chu Li stood at the peak of a mountain and looked down at the formation that Chung Yuan had set up. If he had not passed by earlier, he would have been fooled. Although Chung Yuan was dead, the formation was still intact. Zheng Er and the others had already killed Chung Yuan, but they admired this formation very much. Hence, they still borrowed it. This way, ordinary people would not be able to discover the existence of the arcane realm, which was more beneficial to the concealment of the arcane realm. Chu Li felt that sending Zheng Da's head over would be enough to stabilize the Great Dream sect. I Ching Song had just taken over as sect leader and had two choices. One was to avenge Chung Yuan, and the other was to cultivate in isolation. Based on I Ching Song's personality, he would probably choose the first option. However, after Chu Li sent Zheng Da's head and avenged Chung Yuan, I Ching Song could only choose the second option. They would definitely guess if Chu Li had killed Chung Yuan. With this suspicion, it would be easier for him to make the second option. What he wanted to do now was to buy time and give himself a chance to explore the arcane realm. Then, he would be one step ahead of the disciples of the Flying Heaven sect to get more magical fruits, improve faster, and become stronger than the Great Dream sect. When that time came, all the tricks that the Great Dream sect had up their sleeves would be useless. Of course, the Tianfeng sect was also a big obstacle. The first thing Chu Li needed to do was to get rid of the Tianfeng sect. He stood at the peak of the mountain and looked down for a long time. There was no movement below. It seemed that Zheng Er and the others had already entered the arcane realm. They were certain that Chu Li would enter the arcane realm again, so they set up an inescapable trap in the arcane realm. Chu Li sighed. He really had to enter the arcane realm. He had no other choice. He appeared in the arcane realm in a flash. He was already in the valley. The spirit wolf was howling at the sky. Sensing Chu Li's presence, it turned its head to look at him, then turned and left lightly. Chu Li smiled. As expected of a spirit beast, its senses were sharp and it knew when to hide. Knowing that it was no match for the wolf, it immediately dodged. His omniscient mirror had already seen that Zheng Er and the others were on the cliff above the Green Dragon Pond. They had set up an ambush in the same place. It was obvious that they had figured out Chu Li's temper. A proud person like him would definitely get up from where he fell, so they were certain that he would go back. Chu Li was indeed very interested in the Green Dragon Pond. He wanted to know what mysteries there were in the pond below. It might be an opportunity for him, just like when he met the evil Nether Dragon and obtained its help. He was not afraid of the Green Dragon, but the surrounding moss and the pond below, as well as the strange void. However, the more he was afraid, the more he wanted to understand. The next moment, he appeared behind Zheng Er. Zheng Er did not notice him. He was still sitting on a rock and reading a book. Chu Li could only cough softly. Zheng Er turned around and was greeted by a black light. Then, he was swallowed by the darkness. He was dead, and his head rolled on the ground. Chu Li looked at the head and Zheng Er's body. He wanted to see how Zheng Er was resurrected. P.S. Update complete. Chapter 2495. Second Senior Brother. A gray-robed elder appeared and roared in anger. Then, 4 gray-robed elders came out and looked at Zheng Er on the ground. Their faces were as dark as steel, and their eyes were burning like torches. However, they did not stop moving. The 4 of them stood at the positions of the green dragon, white tiger, vermilion bird, and black tortoise respectively. They clasped their hands in front of their chests and struck their palms toward the sky. There was a muffled boom in the sky, as if thunder had struck. The gray-robed elder placed Zheng Er's severed head on Zheng Er's neck and activated his inner energy with both palms. Bam! Suddenly, a bolt of lightning struck Zheng Er's body. His body trembled like a sieve and light shot out. The gray-robed elder who was channeling energy on Zheng Er's forehead trembled as well, but he gritted his teeth and endured it until the light and lightning dissipated. The other four each struck Zheng Er's chest. Bam! The gray-robed elder who was pressing on Zheng Er's forehead flew out and spat out a mouthful of blood in the air. When he landed on the ground, he was dispirited and pale. The other four gray-robed elders each slapped their palms on his back. His spirit recovered at a speed visible to the naked eye. He was full of energy, and his previous dispiritedness disappeared. Zheng Er suddenly sat up and closed his eyes tightly. He was motionless. The 5 gray-robed elders came to his side and guarded him. They looked left and right, afraid that Chu Li would appear again. Chu Li was not in a hurry to appear. He was still observing in the dark. He saw Zheng Er suddenly open his eyes, and light shot out from them. Then, the light slowly dissipated and returned to normal. He touched his neck and sighed. "It's Wu Yuanxi again. It's him." One of the gray-robed elders gritted his teeth and said coldly, "He's so daring to come again. We must avenge eldest senior brother." Zheng Er touched his wound. Although it had healed, the pain was still there. His mind kept replaying the appearance of the heavenly, demonic blade. The feeling of powerlessness made him feel like he had fallen into a cold cellar. "What should we do?" One of the gray-robed elders said, "Second senior brother, we can't let him come to us like this. This guy is too cunning. If we wait for him to come, who knows how many tricks we'll fall into." "Yes." Zheng Er nodded slowly. Wu Yuanxi had probably gone into hiding and started cultivating in seclusion. However, they were wasting time here and couldn't cultivate in peace. Although their cultivation had reached its limit, it was useless for them to cultivate in seclusion. However, the more proficient they were with the Sky Devil Blade, the better it would be for them. They had not mastered it to perfection. Back when Zhang Xian was in the secret realm, he was unable to read the ancient books of the Heavenly Wind sect. As such, there were many martial arts that he could not cultivate at all. After coming out this time, he had read through the ancient books in the scripture pavilion and gained a lot. There were many martial arts that he wanted to cultivate. At the same cultivation level, after learning a few ancient martial arts, their individual strength would increase by several times, so they really wanted to go into seclusion and cultivate bitterly. "Then what should we do?" A gray-robed old man next to him snorted and said, "It's useless to attack the Flying Heaven sect. They've already moved away, and the Dancing Butterfly sect, which was on good terms with them, has also disappeared." "What about the Profound Heart sect?" someone asked. The gray-robed elder shook his head and said, "The previous sect master, Zhao Lingfeng, and Huang Tianyi of the Profound Heart sect were lovers. However, after Wu Yuanxi took over as the sect master, his relationship with the Profound Heart sect became ordinary." "Then how we find him?" "Just say that he was the one who killed Cheng Yuan. Spread the news, and the Great Dream sect won't be able to find him." Zheng Er gritted his teeth and snorted. He actually did not want to look for Chu Li anymore, as long as Chu Li did not look for him. However, as the second senior brother, under the circumstances where the eldest senior brother was already dead, if he wanted the Heavenly Wind sect to unify the heavenly demonic realm, the only way was to kill Chu Li. Therefore, he could only brace himself. Compared to a huge threat like Chu Li, he felt that it was better to take the initiative to eliminate him. "Will it work?" A gray-robed elder frowned and said, "The Great Dream sect isn't that easy to fool. It'll definitely work." Zheng Er sneered and said, "If it was somewhere else, the Great Dream sect would definitely know who killed Cheng Yuan. However, here, the heavenly secrets are hidden, and they can't find out who killed Cheng Yuan at all. Why can't it be Wu Yuanxi?" "That's right. Wu Yuanxi has a high cultivation level, and he can hide from the heavenly secrets," another gray-robed elder said slowly. "Everything fits the characteristics of the murderer who killed Cheng Yuan. There aren't many people in the world who can kill Cheng Yuan. Wu Yuanci is the biggest suspect. Zheng Er scoffed and said, "There's no need to say anything else. The Great Dream Sect is probably already suspecting him. It's useless no matter how Wu Yuanci tries to explain." "All right then, let's spread the news," a gray-robed elder said. Zheng Er smiled. TSS. Suddenly, there was a soft sound, and then everything went black. Zheng Er was very familiar with this feeling, and he immediately knew that it was Chu Li. However, before he could curse, he was already swallowed by the darkness, and his head was once again separated from his neck. Wu Yuanci. Amidst the angry roars, the 5 gray-robed elders pounced at Chu Li as if they had gone mad. Chu Li's body was unpredictable, and he disappeared without a trace in a flash. The next moment, he appeared behind another gray-robed elder. A black light flashed, and the head was separated from the neck. Then there were continuous flashes, and every time the black light flashed, a head would fly. The 5 gray-robed elders did not even have the time to say a second sentence before they were all killed by Chu Li. 5 heads rolled everywhere, and the gray-robed elders nearby could not even get close. They were using void diversion, but after Chu Li's soul energy had greatly increased, his heavenly demonic aerial manipulation technique was even stronger. Within a radius of 100 meters, the void was directly locked, and they could not move. The elders who were pouncing over thought that it was caused by their own formation, so they quickly changed their course and used their light body technique. However, during this delay, Chu Li had already stopped, and the 5 of them were already dead. This time, Chu Li deliberately activated the heavenly demonic blade and directly crushed their internal organs and brain matter. He was sure that even if they had a method of resurrection, they would not be able to come back to life. Because there was no treasure to restrain them, the heavenly demonic blade not only destroyed their bodies, but also devoured their souls. Even if they had the means to transcend the heavens, they would not be able to come back to life. When more than 10 gray-robed elders came over and saw the 6 corpses on the ground, they were furious. Their hair stood up, and their gray robes fluttered. Wu Yuanci. They roared into the sky, and it was like a thunderclap that shook the sky. All the rocks, grass, and trees in the surroundings were swept away, and in the blink of an eye, it became a flat land. This land was above Green Dragon Pond, and the 6 corpses were not swept away, which was particularly eye-catching. They surrounded the corpses and protected them in preparation for resurrection. However, Chu Li appeared in the void not far away, and he calmly looked at them. "Wu Yuanci," a gray-robed elder pointed at him, and his eyes were bloodshot. His face was twisted, and he said firmly, "You must die, and you must die a horrible death." Chu Li smiled. "Can't you all be resurrected? Let's give it a try." He also wanted to see if this group of people could resurrect Zheng Er and the others. He had seen the secret skill before, and it was indeed mysterious, but the price of resurrection was very high. Otherwise, he would not have been able to kill 5 people so easily. The key was to use the resurrection skill. Their resurrection secret skill was not suitable for him, but it did not mean that it was not suitable for the Flying Heaven faction. If he really obtained this secret skill and passed it to the Flying Heaven faction, it would play an important role in the disciples' courage and unity. "Wu Yuanci, we've been patient, but in return, you're aggressive," a gray-robed elder said slowly. A gray-robed elder said slowly, "Since you've decided to end your own life, we won't be polite anymore." Chapter 2496. Chu Li chuckled and shook his head. "Endure? What a joke." The expressions of the other 10+ gray-robed old men became even more unsightly. Wu Yuanci was still so unbridled until now, and it made them seem even more useless. They'd watched helplessly as their senior brothers died miserably beneath his saber, yet they were powerless to do anything. They had not experienced this feeling for many years. Now that they felt it again, they hated Chu Li even more. Chu Li sighed. "If you don't save them now, I'm afraid you won't be able to save them." One of the gray-robed elders clenched his teeth and decided to save them first. Chu Li smiled and nodded. That's the big picture. Wu will settle this score. The gray-robed elder clenched his teeth. Chu Li smiled. All right, then let's settle this. He retreated a dozen meters after saying that, indicating that he would not disturb them. However, the gray-robed elders would not be careless, as they had experienced Chu Li's shamelessness. They quickly performed their secret skills. Chu Li did not disturb them. Instead, he closed his eyes as if he was adjusting his breath and channeling in preparation for the next battle. This made the gray-robed elders feel relieved. They knew that performing their secret skills to save people would consume a lot of energy, but they had to do it. They could not just leave them to die. If they did that, they might be the next ones to die, and they could not be saved. They left 2 elders to guard against Chu Li while the rest performed their secret skills. After a while, thunder rumbled in the sky, followed by flashes of lightning. The ground began to tremble. It was the most crucial moment. One of the gray-robed elders roared. He realized that the secret skill had no effect. It was like a clay ox entering the sea. When the lightning entered his body, there was no reaction at all. It was as if it hit the ground, and there was no sign of life. As such, the secret skill was considered to have failed, and he could not save his senior brothers. He could not help but roar in disappointment. A few more roars were heard. All of them could not be saved because the secret skill had failed. They looked dispirited and listless as they stared at Chu Li. Their eyes were bloodshot, as if they were about to drip water. Their eyes were burning with anger. At this time, no matter how slow they were, they knew that something was wrong. The problem was with Chu Li. Chu Li had used a special secret technique to kill Zheng Er and the others, and since then, they could not be revived using the secret technique and died completely. They could feel the strangeness of Zheng Er and the others' bodies. Their internal organs and brains were all destroyed, and what was even more hateful was that there was not a trace of soul aura at all. When they were killed, their souls were also destroyed. From then on, his soul would be obliterated, and he wouldn't even be able to enter the cycle of reincarnation. He would completely vanish from the world. If the soul did not dissipate, after cultivating to an extremely high level, one could cultivate a secret technique that allowed one to recall their past life's memories. Thus, death was not a true disappearance, but Zheng Er and the others had completely disappeared. This showed how hateful Chu Li was. They were furious. Chu Li smiled as he looked at them. He had already mastered their secret skills. He sighed and asked, "What kind of secret skill is this?" The gray-robed elders stared at him without saying a word. Chu Li already knew that this was the resurrection technique, one of the top secret techniques of the Tianfeng sect. It had been passed down since ancient times, and the requirements to use it were extremely strict. Without enough cultivation, one would not be able to use it. Moreover, they had 10,000 years of cultivation to be able to use it successfully. An average person would not even think about it. Chu Li smiled. "You still want revenge? We must kill you," one of the gray-robed elders said firmly. He took out a pearl from his pocket and raised it up. He said coldly, "It's a pity that we came too late." This bead was clear and translucent, like a bead carved out of ice. It shone with a threatening light, and Chu Li felt a warm aura. It did not seem to have any power, but it made him feel strange. He frowned and said in a deep voice, "This is a counter to the heavenly demonic blade, the Sun Pearl." The gray-robed elder said coldly, "It can suppress all evil, and the heavenly demonic blade is the same." Chu Li smiled. "Very good." The crowd stared at Chu Li. With the Sun Pearl, they were confident that even if they were killed by Chu Li, their souls would be preserved and they could be resurrected. Their hearts were filled with fearlessness and anger again. Chu Li slowly pulled out the heavenly demonic blade and said calmly, "Let's see how many slashes you can take." He swung his blade and disappeared together with the heavenly demonic blade. The next moment, he appeared behind a gray-robed elder. The gray-robed elder sensed something strange and wanted to dodge, but the void froze. He paused for a moment, and his head was already separated from his body. Chuli frowned and swung his blade, killing the second gray-robed elder. He sighed. The sun pearl was indeed mysterious. It could block the devouring of the heavenly demonic blade and not devour these people's souls. However, it did not matter to Chuli even if he could not devour their souls. As long as he killed them all, he could not use the resurrection technique. Moreover, as long as he built the chakra pagoda, he would be able to store their souls in it. By then, he would be able to do whatever he wanted with them. More importantly, he wanted to use the chakra pagoda to look through all their memories and understand the secret realm. Once he knew this, the arcane realm would belong to him. He could use it completely to help the Flying Heaven sect rise. He continued to kill as he thought. The power of the heavenly demonic blade had become stronger since his soul was strengthened. With a swing of the blade, it could cross the void and cut off a head without any hindrance. It did not give the opponent a chance to dodge. Go! Suddenly, one of the gray-robed elders yelled, and his body suddenly exploded. Bang! The surrounding void trembled. Although Chuli had the heavenly demonic aerial manipulation skill, he could not help but stagnate. His body was forced back by an invisible force. As he retreated, the 6 gray-robed elders had already shot out in 2 different directions. They disappeared in an instant. The remaining 2 gray-robed elders rushed forward. Bang, bang. Another 2 muffled explosions were heard. Chuli was sent flying more than 10 meters away. He wanted to chase after them, but it was too late. Most importantly, the sun pearl rolled onto the ground. The person who had the pearl was one of the gray-robed elders who had self-destructed. Chuli went forward and picked up the sun pearl. It was warm to the touch, and he felt as if he was soaking in a hot spring. It was indescribably comfortable. However, he was not in a hurry to study it. Instead, he kept it and quickly built 9 rotary pagoda to form the 9-tripod heaven-suppressing formation. This isolated the surrounding formation. Then, he stood at the edge of the cliff and looked down. The green dragon pond was still not visible. The invisible fog hindered the omniscient mirror's observation. The omniscient mirror's power was greatly reduced in this invisible fog. It could not see too far and could not see the situation below clearly. He was not in a hurry to chase after the 6 gray-robed elders who had escaped. They were no longer a threat. He entered the rotary pagoda and looked at the 10 or so souls in the pagoda. He sat in the pagoda and began to use his secret skill to pry into the soul's memories. However, the 10,000 years of memories were all white. Their days were extremely dull. Chuli sighed as he watched. Living like this for 10,000 years was not really a happy life. Instead, it was a kind of torture and pain. Once the arcane realm was opened, they were finally free after they came out. They had suffered in the arcane realm for 10,000 years and had become a little crazy. They wanted to unify the heavenly demonic realm, not for the Tianfeng sect. They simply wanted to vent their anger. Chuli shook his head when he saw this. Once they vented their anger, there was no telling how many innocent people would die. P.S. Update completed. I am so ashamed that I can't face anyone. The more anxious I am, the less I can write. Chapter 2497. Chuli stood on the wheel pagoda and looked at the sky and the arcane realm. He was in high spirits, and his eyes were bright as if he could see the power of the Flying Heaven sect. From the information obtained from their memories, Chuli knew which treasures could be used and which could not be used. Although they could not find out everything, the arcane realm was a treasure land that had not been fully explored. However, these treasures were enough for the Flying Heaven sect to rise. However, he suddenly realized, did he really want the Flying Heaven sect to rise and unify the heavenly demon realm? Should he use the merit to ascend to the first heaven? Or should he be like Song Wuji, achieving perfection in his body and ascending? He did not know much about the first heaven, so he thought it was better to ascend with his body. His original body was stronger than the first heaven, so he could start over and recover his cultivation step by step. However, now that he understood the first heaven and knew that he would get a soul lotus after ascending, he could recover his cultivation immediately. The foundation of strength was still the soul. As long as the soul was strong, the body formed by the soul lotus would be even stronger. If the soul was weak, the body formed by the soul lotus would be even weaker. However, he did not know what restrictions there were for the body formed by the soul lotus. If there were no restrictions, he did not have to pursue perfection in his body to ascend. If there were restrictions, then he could think about other things. The key was to understand the wonders of the soul lotus. There were other things besides the soul lotus. He had to understand them one by one and then figure out the wonders of a perfect body. After a careful understanding, he could choose his own path. However, now that there was a chance for the Flying Heavens sect to rise, he could not let it go. After all, the stronger the Flying Heavens sect was, the stronger he would be. There were many things that he did not have to do personally, and the disciples of the Flying Heavens sect could handle them for him. He floated to the edge of the cliff and looked down at the green dragon pool, but he shook his head. The old guys from the Tianfeng sect could not figure out the truth of the green dragon pool because the green dragon was too powerful. More importantly, the pool water and the devil moss were unbreakable threats. His figure flashed, and he came to a few places, plucked a few fruits, and ate them first. These fruits were indeed miraculous. Although they were not as good as the divine demon herbs, they could strengthen the body. His original discomfort disappeared, and the pressure from the strength of his soul finally disappeared. He allowed a long sigh of relief. With this kind of pressure, he had always been careful and didn't dare to use his full strength, or else his body would be in danger of collapsing. Now, however, he was no longer afraid. Instead, his body was stronger and his strength was greater than before. He didn't care about the 6 old monsters of the Heavenly Wind sect who had escaped. They were no longer a threat to him, and they were even more afraid of death at this age. They knew that it was impossible for them to be domineering, so they wouldn't come out to die. After consuming the wondrous fruit, he quietly sat on the cliff and circulated the heavenly spirit scripture. He felt that he was only a step away from breaking through the 8th level and reaching the 9th level. As long as he broke through, his strength would skyrocket. Suddenly, the sound of footsteps was heard. Chuli turned his head to look at the 6 gray-robed elders who had appeared out of thin air. Chuli raised his eyebrows and laughed in surprise. "I've really underestimated your courage." He had thought that the 6 elders would run to a place to hide so that he wouldn't be able to chase after them, and they wouldn't dare to show up again, let alone talk about the unification of the Heavenly Wind sect in the Heavenly Demon realm. He didn't expect that they would dare to show up again. A slightly plump, gray-robed elder cupped his fists and said in a deep voice, "If we change our allegiance and join the Flying Heavens sect, will you accept it, Sect Master Wu?" Chuli raised his eyebrows. The slightly plump, gray-robed elder said, "Sect Master Wu, you heard me right. We want to join the Flying Heavens sect and become your subordinates." Chuli burst into laughter. Don't joke around. He didn't think it was true at all. He had killed so many of them, and only 6 of them were left. They hated him to the core, so how could they become his subordinates? It was a huge joke. They just wanted to get close to him and launch a surprise attack, so that they could perish together. However, he allowed the 6 of them to stay where they were without alerting them. He was secretly activating the heavenly demon scripture, ready to perform the heavenly demonic aerial manipulation at any time. The 6 elders stared at him with a serious expression. Chuli frowned. "Do you really want to join the Flying Heavens sect?" "Yes," the slightly plump elder said in a deep voice. "Do you think we're doing this for revenge?" Chuli nodded slowly. The slightly plump elder said, "We do want revenge. After all, eldest senior brother and second senior brother have a deep friendship with us. We can't let them die in vain. However, compared to revenge, we want to send more. Compared to having another 10,000 years of lifespan and enjoying a colorful life, revenge could be put aside for future opportunities. The priority was to survive before taking revenge. Otherwise, everything would be in vain. They only had a few steps left in their lifespan. If they didn't hurry up, they might not have the chance to ascend anymore. Wu Yuanci was their biggest opportunity. As long as they could follow Chu Li and unify the heavenly demonic realm, they could ascend with merit. Otherwise, they would not live for long. For this, they were willing to risk everything. Chu activated the omniscient mirror to its limit and used his soul to forcefully enter their minds. Seeing what they were thinking, he was shocked and suddenly understood. He then nodded slowly. This seemed strange at first, but after thinking about it carefully, it was in line with human nature. There was nothing strange about it. Chu said, "You want to join the Flying Heaven sect because you want to unify the heavenly demonic realm, right?" "Yes," the slightly plump elder said. "Out of all the sects in the heavenly demonic sect, only the Flying Heaven sect has the potential to rise." "There's also the Sky Wind sect," Chu said. The slightly plump elder sighed. "Originally, the Sky Wind sect was the most promising, but because of you, sect leader Wu, there's no hope. It'll be difficult for the 6 of us to surpass you, sect leader Wu." Chu smiled. The slightly plump elder said, "Since we can't surpass you, we'll be on the same side as the mountain. That's why we want to join you, sect leader Wu. I wonder if you want to unify the heavenly demonic realm within 2 years, sect leader Wu?" Chu said, "If you want to unify the heavenly demonic realm, it won't be easy. You can't just rely on martial arts. If your martial arts are strong enough, it'll be much easier," the slightly plump elder said. Chu nodded slowly. "What about the Sky Wind sect? Can you let the Sky Wind sect merge with the Flying Heaven sect?" "That's what we're thinking," the slightly plump elder said. "Only by combining the 2 sects and increasing their strength will there be a greater hope of intimidating the other sections. With our martial arts and sect leader Wu's, there's a great chance." As he spoke, his eyes lit up and stared at Chu. Chu pondered thoughtfully. The hatred between the Flying Heaven sect and the Sky Wind sect was extremely deep. It was not just a one-generation hatred, but a deep-seated hatred that had accumulated for generations. It was impossible for them to merge into one sect in a short period of time. They would only fight each other. However, if the 2 sects were to merge and their strength would stack, it would indeed be a great boost. It would be the foundation for unifying the heavenly demonic realm. Neither of the 2 sects were the top sects, but together they would be enough to become one of the strongest sections. They would also be able to form a sufficient deterrent. A top-notch master like him would not be enough to deter the other sections. They would also need a sect with sufficient strength. Only by combining the 2 could they form the strongest deterrent and subdue the enemy without a fight. "Sect leader Wu, after we join the Flying Heaven sect, we'll give you a big gift," the slightly plump elder said. Chapter 2498. "If you dare to take the Great Oath, I'll accept 6 of you," Chu said slowly. His eyes were sharp as he could see through the minds of the 6 people. His gaze finally fell on an old man who was thin like iron, and he sighed and said, "This is—" He shook his head as he spoke. "This is our junior brother Sheba," the slightly plump elder said. "I'm ranked 8th. Chu sighed. "I'm afraid you have no intention of joining the Flying Heaven sect. You have other intentions, don't you?" Zheng Sheba was skinny and expressionless. He glared at Chu and closed fist saluted. "Why do you say that, sect leader Wu?" Chu said, "You're planning to seek revenge after joining the Flying Heaven sect, right? It's hard to guard against a thief in the family. It's a great opportunity for revenge. I'm impressed that you're so determined to seek revenge." Zheng Sheba shook his head. "Sect leader Wu, you're wrong. I can take the Great Oath." Chu said, "For those who are not afraid of death and want to have their souls destroyed, the Great Oath won't hold them back." "Forget it. Then how can I make you believe me?" Zheng Sheba asked. His face was gloomy and his eyes flickered like candles. He did not expect Chu to be so powerful that he could see through his thoughts. Even Zheng Sheba and the others did not know about his thoughts. He did not tell anyone and only wanted to act in secret. His senior and junior brothers were scared out of their wits and did not dare to go against Wu Yuanci anymore. They only wanted to ascend with merits and no longer care about grudges. They were truly insane. However, he could understand the fear and actions of his senior and junior brothers, so he would not go along with the flow. He was prepared to wait for Chu to accept the offer before entering the Flying Heaven sect's interior. Then, he would secretly make a move inside the Flying Heaven sect and look for an opportunity to strike when Chu Li was unguarded. Chu Li smiled. I've already seen through your thoughts. Do you still want to join the Flying Heaven sect? Yes. Zheng Shiba nodded slowly. I want to join the Flying Heaven sect and unify the heavenly demonic realm. Chu Li smiled. All right, if that's the case, I'll accept it. You'll have to make the great oath of the gods and demons and add one more condition. As long as the heavenly demonic realm is unified, you'll be free and can come and go as you please. You don't have to listen to me anymore, but before you unify the heavenly demonic realm, you'll have to listen to many people. Zheng Ba and the others nodded slowly and immediately made the great oath of gods and demons. From then on, they would join the Flying Heaven sect and become UNC subordinates. They would obey his orders and would never disobey or rebel. If they violated this oath, their souls would be destroyed and they would never be able to enter the cycle of reincarnation. Once the great oath of the deity and demon was made, it was no different from selling themselves to Chu Li. They were like slaves and were even worse than ordinary subordinates. However, in order to gain Chu Li's trust and achieve the great cause of unifying the heavenly demonic realm, they had no choice but to do so. What they wanted the most was for Chu Li to not have to do anything himself. The six of them could do it themselves and wipe out all the sects so that they could accumulate enough merit to ascend. If Chu Li did most of the work, they would not have enough merit and would not be able to ascend. That was why they were willing to be ordered around. Chu Li nodded and smiled in satisfaction. Good, then we're a family from now on. Zheng Ba let out a sigh of relief and gave a fist salute. Sect leader, the matter of the Tianfeng sect merging with the Flying Heaven sect must be handled properly. Otherwise, it'll easily cause internal friction. Chu Li nodded. Just change the name of the Tianfeng sect. Everything else remains the same. Don't be with the disciples of the Flying Heaven sect to prevent internal strife. You guys will still be in charge of the Tianfeng sect. Yes. Zheng Ba nodded quickly. Chu Li said, the disciples of the Tianfeng sect will stay in the arcane realm to cultivate. They can only come out after they've cultivated. This, Zheng Ba hesitated. The disciples of the Flying Heaven sect won't come in. Chu Li shook his head slowly. The arcane realm was the arcane realm of the Tianfeng sect. The Tianfeng technique was the only reason the disciples were safe. If anyone else came in, they would definitely die. The entire arcane realm would repel and destroy non-disciples of the Tianfeng sect. Their way of distinguishing was the heart technique. If there was a trace of impurity or impurity in the Tianfeng technique, it would not survive in the arcane realm. This was the mystery of the arcane realm. Chu Li and Zheng Ba had yet to figure out the reason. Chu Li did not plan to figure it out for now. It would consume too much energy. Moreover, as long as he plucked the rare fruit for the disciples of the Flying Heaven sect, they would still be able to advance rapidly. They would not be inferior to the disciples of the Tianfeng sect. Zheng Ba looked at Chu Li in shock. He initially thought that Chu Li would be eager to let the disciples of the Flying Heaven sect enter the arcane realm. He was already prepared to persuade Chu Li not to act rashly. The arcane realm was too dangerous, especially for non-disciples of the Tianfeng sect. Chu Li smiled. I know the characteristics of the arcane realm. If we really let the disciples of the Flying Heaven sect enter, we'll be harming them. Sect leader is wise. Zheng Ba fist saluted and sighed. Chu Li waved his hand. I know you guys are eager to accomplish something and unify the heavenly demonic realm. However, this matter can't be rushed. We need to pay attention to the steps and methods. If we attack rashly, we'll only incur the wrath of the masses and make them join forces. May I know what sect leader has in mind? Zheng Ba hurriedly asked. This was what they were really concerned about. It did not matter if it was the Tianfeng sect or the Flying Heaven sect, as long as they could unify the heavenly demonic realm. Chu Li said, we can rope in the dancing butterfly sect, mystery heart sect, and demonic sword sect. We can also try the heaven-devouring sect and Izumo sect. However, it'll be difficult for the great dream sect. Our main enemy is still the Great Dream Sect. They can predict the future and have always had the ambition to unify the heavenly demonic realm. Zheng Ba frowned and nodded. Chu Li said, "Let's pretend to be enemies first. We'll make people think that we're in a life-and-death situation." Zheng Ba's small eyes suddenly lit up. He clapped his hands and praised. "Good idea." This idea was truly brilliant. They rarely had a match in the present age, with the exception of Wu Yuanci. The rest of them were like clay chickens and pottery dogs that couldn't withstand a single blow. However, such a forceful attack was usually time-consuming and exhausting, and it was difficult to win the hearts of the people. If Chu Li were to go against them at this time, and were evenly matched, he would be able to gather the hearts of the people. All the sect leaders would treat the Flying Heaven sect as their backbone. At this time, either they or Chu Li would play dead to pacify the hearts of the people. Chu Li smiled. "I can swear the great demon oath that I won't burn the bridge after crossing the river." Then he raised his finger and swore that he would not burn the bridge after crossing the river. As long as they did not betray him, he would not attack them. Once the great demon oath was made, Zheng Ba and the others were completely relieved. Chu Li said, "Since you're in a hurry, let's start. We'll talk after we defeat all the masters. However, try not to kill if you can, or there will be endless trouble in the future." "Understood," Zheng Ba said in a low voice. Chu Li fist saluted and watched as they turned to leave. Chu Li stood on the cliff and pondered. He felt that the world was unpredictable. After so many twists and turns, things had come to this. Not only did Zheng Ba and the others not seek revenge, but they also became his helpers and wanted to unify the heavenly demonic realm. He shook his head and laughed, but he did not refuse. The sect leader of the Flying Heaven sect had originally come to this on a whim. Unifying the heavenly demonic realm was just a temporary attempt. It would be great if it succeeded, but it did not matter if it failed. He picked some strange fruits and appeared in great light surpassing realm in a flash. He appeared in his courtyard. Sun Mingwei was in isolated cultivation. Her white, jade-like body was trembling slightly as if she was suffering from great pain. Chu Li suddenly realized why his heart was moved. So it was here. He appeared beside Sun Mingwei in a flash and put his hand on her back. He channeled his inner energy to help her. Chapter 2499. Sun Mingyue's body suddenly shone brightly, then shone again and shone again as if she was breathing. The light expanded and contracted, gradually becoming more and more solid as if it was real. Finally, all the light shone into her body, making her look even more pure and flawless like white jade. Sun Mingyue slowly opened her eyes. Without turning around, she asked softly, "When did you come out?" Chu Li was still pressing on her back as inner energy flowed into her. He smiled. "I just came out. Congratulations on your great improvement in cultivation, but you still need to rest for a while to prevent any internal injuries." At this stage of cultivation, their bodies were both strong and delicate. If they were not careful, they would suffer internal injuries that would greatly affect their future. Sometimes, these internal injuries were the reason why they could not advance further in their cultivation. Their bodies were strong to outsiders, but outsiders would not be able to hurt them. Their bodies were delicate to themselves, but their inner energy was too strong, so they could easily hurt themselves. It was like a double-edged sword. After Sun Mingyue calmed herself down and began to channel for a quarter of an hour, her entire body felt warm and smooth. Her great light scripture had advanced to the next level and became as gentle as water. It was warm but not scorching, and it had worn away her sharpness. This was with the help of Chu Li's heavenly spirit scripture. Otherwise, it would have taken a long time to complete. With the help of the heavenly spirit scripture, it only took 15 minutes. Chu Li swayed and moved from behind her to in front of her. The two of them sat opposite each other, only half an arm's length apart. Their knees were touching, and they could smell each other's breath. He took out a box and handed it to her. Sun Mingyue rolled her eyes at him and took it. She opened it and saw 2 fruits inside. She looked up at him. "What fruits are these?" "One strengthens your cultivation, and the other strengthens your body. It'll be best if you consume it now that you've just advanced, Chu Li said. Sun Mingwe did not say much. She ate the apricot-like fruits and began channeling with Chu Li's help. 2 hours later, Sun Mingwe stopped. She was dressed in snow-white clothes, and her eyes were gentle. Her body seemed to be emitting a gentle and warm light that calmed one's mind. One could not help but feel tranquil and otherworldly, wanting to stay in this state forever. Chu Li was shocked. He could not help but laugh. What are you? Sun Mingwe shook her head. The Great Light Scripture is almost perfected. I'm only one level away. The Great Light Scripture has such a wonderful effect that it can make people want to convert. Chu Li asked. Sun Mingwe nodded slowly. The Great Light Scripture is one of the most profound Buddhist doctrines. Naturally, it has such a magical effect. Chu Li said, Don't tell me you have the thought of transcending the mortal world and entering the gate of Buddhism. Sun Mingwe rolled her eyes at him and snorted. I'm already stuck in the mortal world. How can I leave? Chu Li smiled. Sun Mingwe scoffed. It seems like everything is going well for you. Are you going to continue looking for Shao Qi? Yes. Chu Li stopped smiling. He thought about how Shao Qi was alone in a foreign land and how the Northern Territory was not peaceful at all. There were endless fights and killings. He wondered if Shao Qi was safe. Was she cultivating hard on the mountain? Was she unable to enter the mountain? Or was she fighting at the foot of the mountain? Thinking that she, who had always been cold and aloof, would be ordered to kill by others, he couldn't help but feel a wave of heartache, unable to accept it. Sun Mingwe said, Then let's continue. Just don't be too anxious. It'll only ruin things. Chu Li kept the wooden box in his inner pocket and sighed. Then he told them about the recent events. The women around him were his confidants and also his brains. They were all intelligent people who could see through the affairs of the world. They could help him come up with ideas and fill in the gaps so that he wouldn't make any mistakes. Sun Mingwe frowned slightly. She got off the bed and paced with her hand behind her back. Then she left the house and went to the courtyard outside. The two of them went to the gazebo outside and looked at the rustling bamboo branches and leaves as they pondered. It seems like the longer you live, the more afraid you are of death. Sun Mingwe sighed. The fear of death can make people do something like this. It's quite crazy. She couldn't imagine that such powerful people would put aside their mortal enemies to help their enemies in order to unify the heavenly demonic realm and ascend. If it were her, she would never be able to do it. Nonetheless, she would never underestimate them because of this. If she had lived for 10,000 years and had yet to fulfill her ambitions, she might not be as good as them. She would also be driven to the brink of collapse by the fear of death and would do the same thing. Chu Li asked, Can we unify the heavenly demonic realm by doing this? There's a high chance, but things always go beyond one's expectations. We need to make more preparations. Sun Mingwe frowned. Can the 6 of them defeat all the heavenly demonic realm masters? Chu Li nodded slowly. Sun Mingwe asked, Are they really that powerful? They didn't cultivate for 10,000 years for nothing. Chu Li explained, when they were first trapped, they wanted to break out of the arcane realm, so they cultivated hard. Moreover, there's so many rare fruits in the realm, so they improved by leaps and bounds. That's true. Sun Mingwe sighed. How pitiful. She shuddered at the thought of being trapped in the arcane realm for 10,000 years. That was why she sympathized with Shao Qi. She ascended to the upper heaven alone and did not know when Chu Li would be able to go up and meet her. The loneliness must have been unbearable. Let them mess around, Chu Li said. I'll appear after a while. That's for the best, Sun Mingwe said. Chu Li asked, Do you have any intention of unifying the heavenly realm? Sun Mingwe shook her head and laughed. I won't dream of that. The heaven-shaking tower and Taihao Peak are obstacles that I can't overcome. Besides, there are many hidden talents in the heavenly realm. Chu Li smiled. It's also a path to ascension. It's harder than cultivating to perfect mastery. My Great Light Scripture is only one level away, Sun Mingwe said. You should hurry up too. As they spoke, Chu Li held the heaven inspecting credential in his hand again. He slowly opened his eyes and felt the changes in his body. According to the time, 10 days had passed on the upper heaven. However, the body formed by his soul did not seem to be affected at all. His vital energy flowed smoothly, as if he was meditating instead of his soul leaving his body. He discovered a benefit. This time, he did not appear at the previous entrance when he came to the upper heaven. Instead, he entered his body directly. It seemed like the soul lotus was really mysterious. In that case, the body formed by the soul lotus had become the door to his soul. He could enter directly, which saved him a lot of time. He felt that if his soul left his body for 10 days and returned, he would feel uncomfortable and weak. However, the body formed by the soul lotus was no different. It was as strong as before. He floated up and felt a surge of spiritual energy. He activated the life and death scripture, and the spiritual energy from the upper heaven rushed in. He then started to activate the heavenly spirit scripture and calmed himself down to cultivate it. The heavenly spirit scripture was only a step away from entering the 9th level. He could not break through it when he was in the heavenly realm, but it was easy on the upper heaven. A day later, his body trembled. The little beast in the void of his mind suddenly opened its eyes and roared at the sky. Its body shone brightly like a big round mirror. He opened his eyes and smiled. He had finally broken through the 9th level of the heavenly spirit scripture. There was only one level left. He closed his eyes again and prepared to cultivate the 10th level in one go. It would be easier when he reached the heavenly realm. P.S. Update complete. Chapter 2500. After mastering the 9th level of heavenly spirit scripture, the vital energy in his body was like mercury. It was unusually heavy, but it was exceptionally fast when it was activated. It was like a gentle push, and it would move endlessly without any obstacles. His meridians also became exceptionally smooth, as if he was sliding ice cubes on ice. It was unlike before, where it felt like water flowing in a canal. With such inner energy, the power of martial arts was naturally multiplied. He suppressed his excitement and continued to activate it, wanting to advance further. However, after a while, he slowly opened his eyes and shook his head with a sigh. Although he had easily reached the 9th level of heavenly spirit scripture, it was extremely difficult to advance to the 10th level. It was as if it was out of reach. It was as if he looked up at the sky, which was so high that he could not touch it. The difference between the 9th layer and the 10th layer seemed to be only one layer, and it didn't seem to be very far. However, when one really cultivated it, they realized that it was far beyond their reach. It wasn't as easy as they had imagined it to be. Instead, it was tens or even hundreds of times harder than they had imagined. Chuli even doubted whether he could cultivate the heavenly spirit scripture to the 10th level because he could not see any signs of perfecting it. If he continued to cultivate like this, it would be hopeless even if he spent 8 to 10 years. He shook his head again and sighed. It was not surprising. After all, the people here had a longer lifespan and could easily live for 10,000 years. According to this thought, there was no need to rush for 10,000 years. He could just cultivate it slowly, and he would be able to master it after 10,000 years. The state of consummation was so far out of reach that it made him disheartened. This was in the upper heavens, where the spiritual chi was so dense and pure. If it was in the lower realm, in the heavens beyond heaven, who knew how long it would take? Without a special opportunity, it was impossible to consummate. This showed how difficult it was to ascend. If he really wanted to cultivate the upper heaven martial arts, to perfect it and ascend, he definitely could not choose the heavenly spirit scripture. It was too difficult. He exited the cave in a flash and continued north to enter the flying rock mountain range. With his light body technique, he still ran for 10 days and 10 nights. He returned to the outland once and finally arrived at the flying rock mountains on the 10th night. Under the moonlight, the towering mountain was like a giant dragon lying between heaven and earth. It was as if it covered half of the sky. One could only see the mountains and nothing else. His sharp eyesight allowed him to see even further. He could even see that under the moonlight, the white clouds covered the upper half of the mountain range, and only the lower half could be seen. It was like a stone wall in front of his eyes, and he felt like he was under a precipice. Looking at this mountain range from afar, he felt a sense of danger. This flying rock mountain range was like a giant beast. Once he got close, he would be in danger. Through the observation of the omniscient mirror, Chu Li discovered that the forest was shrouded in lush greenery. There was no path up and no signs of human habitation. It seemed to be a forbidden area for humans. So Chu Li leaped onto the treetops and flew upwards. He was about to cross over the flying rock mountains. Even if it was dangerous, he still wanted to cross over and look for Shaoqi in the northern region. Moreover, the danger was not fatal, so he just had to be careful. Finally found it. Suddenly, a cold laugh rang out. Chu Li frowned as he looked at the 8 middle-aged men who had appeared in the void behind him. He could tell at a glance that they were from the Heavenly Sun cult. He did not expect that after he let those 2 guys go, the Heavenly Sun cult would continue to pester him and really come looking for him. The middle-aged man in the lead was handsome and elegant. He gently waved the fan in his hand and took a step forward. When he was only 10 feet away from Chu Li, he slowly closed his white fan and fist saluted. "I am Lu Chun, the 4th envoy of the Heavenly Sun cult." Chu Li nodded. "Nice to meet you. You must be Chu Li?" Lu Chun said slowly. Chu Li replied, "Yes, I am. What does 4th envoy Lu want to say?" "Young Master Chu, are you really a disciple of the Grand Supreme Peak?" Lu Chun waved his fan twice and smiled. "From what I know, the Grand Supreme Peak is not in a good state." Chu Li frowned and looked at him. "What do you mean, 4th envoy Lu?" Lu Chen's eyes were like lightning as he stared into Chu Li's eyes and smiled. "The Grand Supreme Peak no longer exists." Chu Li looked at him seriously. Lu Chen chuckled. "Why, young Master Chu doesn't know about this. Where did 4th envoy Lu get this information?" Chu Li said in a low voice. "It's just a rumor." He used the omniscient mirror to observe and see what Lu Chun was thinking. However, Lu Chen's body was as bright as the sun and could not be observed. It was similar to the Great Light Scripture, but it was more intense and less gentle. The power of the Great Light Scripture was amazing. It was bright but gentle. On the other hand, the Heavenly Sun divine power that Lu Chun cultivated was as fierce as the afternoon sun. It was extremely positive and indestructible. Lu Chun shook his head. "Although the Heavenly Sun cult is not talented, we are well informed. It's a pity that the Grand Supreme Peak was an overlord. I didn't expect it to be destroyed overnight. It's such a pity." Chu Li's face was solemn, and he frowned. His heart was in his throat. The Grand Supreme Peak was where Shaoqi ascended. If the Grand Supreme Peak was destroyed, Shaoqi would be in danger. Although her cultivation level was high, it was far from being able to run amok. Lu Chen waved his fan and sighed. "It seems that young Master Chu doesn't know about this." Chu Li said, "I don't believe that the Grand Supreme Peak was destroyed. This news can't be wrong." Lu Chen shook his head and looked regretful. "However, these things are inevitable. Young Master Chu, please accept it." Chu Li remained silent. Lu Chen said, "Young Master Chu, have you thought about the future?" Chu Li looked up at him. "What do you mean, square messenger Lu?" "Young Master Chu, have you not thought a way out?" Lu Chen asked. Chu Li laughed. "Are you trying to recruit me into the Heavenly Sun cult?" "Yes." Lu Chen nodded slowly. He was very familiar with the flying rock mountains. That was why he teleported here. It saved him a lot of trouble, but it was difficult to find Chu Li. Fortunately, they had spread their net everywhere. More than 100 followers were spread out, and they were lucky enough to meet Chu Li. Chu Li said, "What if I don't accept the recruitment?" Lu Chun closed his fan and shook his head. "I think young Master Chu is a smart man. You know when to advance and when to retreat." Chu Li scoffed. "You're after the Grand Supreme Peak's martial arts, aren't you?" Lu Chen smiled. Although the Grand Supreme Peak was destroyed, the martial arts of the Grand Supreme Peak are indeed top-notch. I can't help but admire them. Chu Li said thoughtfully, "It's a pity that the martial arts of the Grand Supreme Peak can't be taught to outsiders. Otherwise, one soul would be destroyed and never be reincarnated." Lu Chen smiled. "If you join the Heavenly Sun cult, you won't be considered an outsider. Teaching it to outsiders won't be considered a violation of the oath, right?" He knew that when all disciples cultivated advanced martial arts, they would swear a venomous oath not to teach it to outsiders. However, this oath was not invulnerable. Of course, it could be taught internally. What was internal or external? There were loopholes to be exploited. Chu Li said slowly, "I won't violate the oath. You can forget about it." The smile on Lu Chen's face disappeared. He gently tapped his palm with his fan. "Looks like we won't be fellow disciples." Chu Li shook his head. Lu Chen sighed. "Then we can only offend you. Please return to our headquarters." Chu Li scoffed. "Looks like you're determined to hit me when I'm down." Lu Chen said, "You can only blame yourself for coming at the wrong time, young Master Chu. You can only blame yourself for being too coincidental. Why did you have to capture him after he was injured? Wouldn't it be better if he just left with us?" Chu Li smiled. "That depends on your ability." Although he was smiling, his heart was surging with murderous intent. When he heard such bad news, he was worried about Shao Qi. Lu Chun and the others coming to stop him was simply courting death. Chapter 25:01. Sorry for the offense. Lu Chun waved his hand. The other 7 middle-aged men flashed and appeared around Chu Li, forming an encirclement with Lu Chun. They stared at Chu Li fiercely, ready to rush at him at any time. Chu Li snorted. Suddenly, a spiritual force descended from the sky and condensed into several invisible swords. The strength of the soul made these invisible swords extremely pure and powerful, incomparable to the power in the Outland. Lu Chen shouted, "Don't hold back, he's a tough one." The 7 middle-aged men snorted and attacked. TSK, 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 TSK. Chu Li activated the Sword of Indifference, and countless sword auras shot out, forming a storm. Although the 8 men's palm energy was strong and continuously destroyed the sword auras, they could not stop the endless sword auras. The sword auras were extremely pure. The divine sun palm could destroy it, but it consumed a lot of palm energy. Chu Li even condensed the Heavenly Spirit Scripture's inner energy into the sword auras. The Heavenly Spirit Scripture's inner energy was as pure and heavy as mercury, forming an even purer sword. It broke through their palm energy and directly pierced their palms. Suddenly, there was a muffled groan. Other than Lu Chun, who reacted quickly and dodged, the other 7 men's palms were pierced and could only attack with their left hands. Although it was powerful, it had lost its agility. Moreover, they did not dare to be careless in the face of the invisible sword auras. They were afraid that it would be mixed with the Heavenly Spirit Scripture's invisible sword auras. Therefore, the situation was reversed, and Chu Li was suppressing them. TSK, 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 TSK. The sword auras were endless and did not show any signs of drying up. Instead, it became denser and stronger. Chu Li mixed the Heavenly Spirit Scripture's inner energy into it, and it was impossible to defend against it. Lu Chun gritted his teeth and sighed. No wonder the Divine Church coveted the martial arts of Tai Shang Peak so much. It was indeed powerful, not to mention that there were only 8 of them. Even 80 of them would not be able to withstand it. The other 7 men's left palms were also pierced. The sword energy of the Heavenly Spirit Scripture that was mixed with the shapeless sword energy was impossible to defend against. None of them managed to evade it and were pierced through. After their palms were pierced, the energy of the Heavenly Spirit Scripture remained. They could only focus on getting rid of it and did not have the energy to deal with Chu Li. Lu Chun couldn't hold on by himself. He was forced to retreat step by the increasingly dense, invisible sword chi. His whole body shone brightly, but he couldn't protect himself. The power of the 9th level of the Celestial Spirit Scripture was beyond imagination. It could directly break through the protective vigor chi. Lu Chen's hair was a mess, and he cut a sorry figure. He kept retreating, but Chu Li kept pressing forward, ignoring the other 7. The 7 middle-aged men felt both humiliated and fortunate. If he really did treat them like this, their lives would be in danger. Lu Chun shouted, "Young Master Chu, are you really going to resist to the end?" Chu Li smiled. You still want me to surrender under such circumstances? Not bad, Lu Chan said in a low voice. It's not too late to give up now. We can be considered friends. If we really have a falling out, then don't blame us for being ruthless. We'll first cripple your cultivation before taking you back. Chu Li sighed. Looks like I'll have to cripple your cultivation level too. Then the hatred between you and the Heavenly Sun Church will be huge. Lu Chen's body floated as he continuously dodged the sword chi. He said, Young Master Chu, you have to think this through. The Taishang Peak can't support you now. Chu Li laughed. Now that you've hit me when I'm down, isn't a falling out? You wanting to compromise? That's the biggest joke in the world. That's different. Lu Chun shook his head. Chu Li took a deep breath, and a blue light flashed in his eyes. Bam! Lu Chun was sent flying. He shone brightly in the air like a scorching sun. Chu Li appeared in front of him in a flash, and lightly slapped his palm. This rotating palm was a combination of the Heavenly Spirit Scripture, combining the purity of the Heavenly Spirit Scripture with the transformations of the rotating palm. After entering Lu Chen's body, it was full of transformations, making it impossible to defend against. It directly broke through his internal energy. As Lu Chen shone brightly in the air, he spat out a mist of blood. It was dazzling and somewhat poignant. Chu Li calmly stood in the void and watched as he landed with a loud bam. After Lu Chen landed, his face was filled with pain, but he could not get up. Chu Li's palm energy was still wreaking havoc in his body. He could not control it, and it was constantly hurting him. His body was limp, and he no longer had the strength to stand up. He could only desperately resist. Chu Li calmly said, Take care. If this happens again, I won't just cripple your martial arts. I'll take your lives. As soon as he finished speaking, he once again glided to the top of the flying rock mountain forest. He wanted to continue upward, but he was blocked by 12 figures. 4 elders and 8 middle-aged men were staring at him carefully, their faces solemn. Chu Li sighed. You won't give up until you see your coffin. Chu Li, we should be the ones saying that. The skinny elder in the lead said, Think about it. You're only one person. Without the Taishang Peak, you're like a stray dog. What about us? If we kill one, there's still another. No matter how weak the Sky Sun Church is, they're powerful enough to kill you. Can you kill all the disciples of the Sky Sun Church alone? Chu Li said, I'll kill as many as I can. What's the point? The skinny elder shook his head. In today's world, it's hard to survive alone. Even if your cultivation level is high, you can't stop the waves of revenge. You have to stay in a strong sect, and the Sky Sun Church is one of the top sections. If you join the church, you'll be one of our brothers. We'll support each other. How great would that be? Chu Li sneered. The skinny elder continued. What's the benefit of being alone? Without enough support, Xiao Yao Zizai is just deceiving himself. Anyone would dare to go against you. Seeing that Chu Li was unmoved, the thin elder smiled and said, How about this? We don't just want you to hand over the martial arts of Taishang Peak. If you join the Church of the Sun, you can cultivate the secret book of Heavenly Sunday. Chu Li's eyebrows twitched. The skinny elder said, Our Sky Sun secret technique is an ancient martial art. In the past, our founder relied on it to dominate the world. He was almost invincible. Unfortunately, the secret technique is too difficult. It's difficult for people with insufficient cultivation or comprehension to cultivate. The requirements are too high, so it's getting worse with each generation. In the end, the Sky Sun Church fell to this day. Otherwise, the Sky Sun Church could be said to be the top super sect in the world. Chu Li was deep in thought. The skinny elder said, The Sky Sun Church has always been generous to their disciples. For every bit the disciple gives, the church will repay them 3 times. We will not let you hand over the antique technique for nothing. The Sky Sun secret technique is far from being comparable to your Taishang Peak's antique technique. Chu Li scoffed. If that's the case, why do I need the Taishang Peak's antique technique? Because the Sky Sun secret technique's requirements are too strict, there are very few people who can cultivate it. On the other hand, the Taishang Peak's antique technique is suitable for ordinary disciples. The skinny elder said in a deep voice, "This old man is sincere. This is also a great opportunity for you. If you miss it, I'm afraid you'll never have the chance to come into contact with such an antique technique again." Chu Li was a little tempted. The skinny elder saw his expression and became spirited. He continued, "Actually, if we really wanted to kill you, why would we send fourth envoy Lu and the others? We could have just sent us out. It's just out of pity. If we really want to fight, we'll end up in a life and death struggle. Why bother? P.S. Update complete." Chapter 25:02. Chu Li remained silent. It was not that he was afraid that the martial arts of the Taishang Peak would be passed on to outsiders. The unmoved sword technique was indeed exquisite and was also a unique skill. However, the foundation of this unique skill was still the skill. If the skill was not pure, then the power of the unmoved sword would be average. If the skill was pure, then the power would be amazing. Just like his current sword of indifference, its power was truly world-shocking, because his heavenly spirit scripture was profound, already reaching the 9th level, and he even used the spiritual energy of a higher level. However, if one wanted to successfully cultivate the sword of indifference, they needed enough luck. Because he had the life and death scripture, he could easily cultivate it, absorbing the spiritual chi from the upper heaven and turning it into sword chi. For those without the life and death scripture, if they wanted to cultivate this, not only would they need to be extremely talented, they would also need enough soul power and good luck. Otherwise, it would be extremely difficult to succeed. Moreover, even if he could guide the spiritual chi of the first heaven up to condense it into the sword of indifference, it would also consume a lot of spirit, unlike his life and death scripture, which was as easy as taking something out of his pocket and did not consume much spirit. Therefore, in his hands, the unmoved divine sword's power was astonishing. In the hands of others, it was indeed an exquisite lost art, but its power could not be mentioned in the same breath. If it could be used to exchange for the heavenly Yang secret code, it would indeed be a worthwhile trade. The divine sword of forgetfulness was similar to the regal sword scripture, but it was not a martial arts study from the regal peak. It was obtained from the forgetfulness cliff, so it was not a big deal even if it was spread out. It would not cause any trouble for Shao Qi. Moreover, he did not really want to trade the entire sword of indifference. The first 3 levels were the real sword of indifference, while the last 6 levels were created by him. If he really trained hard, there would not be any problems in a short period of time, but it would be very difficult to improve. He had cultivated too many mystical arts, and his attainments in martial arts were profound and peerless. It was very easy for him to create such a mental cultivation method, and it was also flawless. The slender elder saw that Chu Li was really moved, and his heart was excited, but he suppressed his impatience and said calmly, "Master Chu, we are sincere, otherwise we wouldn't have to go through so much trouble. Don't you think?" Chu Li raised his head and looked at him. "Can I really read the Book of Heavenly Sun?" The thin elder hurriedly nodded. "Of course." Chu Li could not help but laugh. "You actually treasure this antique study of Taishang Peak so much. You must know that Taishang Peak has already been destroyed. If it was really powerful, it wouldn't have fallen to such a state." He used the omniscient mirror to look into the elder's mind, but unfortunately, it was blocked by the brilliant light, and he could not see it clearly. He was just curious as to why the Heavenly Sun sect valued the Taishang Peak's lost arts so much. Logically speaking, the Taishang Peak was a first-rate sect, and the Heavenly Sun sect was not bad either. They were also first-rate sects, so their martial arts should be on par. The skinny elder hesitated for a moment and sighed. "To be honest, young Master Chu, the Taishang Peak's martial arts are still unique. It's just that the Taishang Peak's martial arts are incomplete. That's why it has fallen to this state." Chu Li raised his eyebrows. "The regal sword scripture is complete, right? If the regal sword scripture was incomplete, how could Shao Qi have ascended?" The thin elder said, "The regal sword scripture is complete and flawless, but the strongest martial art of the regal peak is not the regal sword scripture." Chu Li scoffed. "What's the use of incomplete martial arts? He saw from the other middle-aged man's mind that what they wanted was not the regal sword scripture, but the swordless scripture. This was not the only thing he saw from the middle-aged man's mind. He also saw their attitude towards him. He wondered if they were sincere about the exchange, but the result was in vain. They only wanted the Tai Ching scripture, not a master like him. It was useless for him to read the Heavenly Sun secret scripture. They could just send more top-notch masters to kill him. It was like burning the bridge after crossing the river and killing the donkey after it had outlived its usefulness. Chuli could not help but snicker. It was really a case of mutual deception. He was scheming against others, but others were also scheming against him. It all depended on who was better. There's no need to be too complete. We only need to extract the essence to strengthen our martial arts. The thin elder said in a low voice, "Our leader is currently editing the Heavenly Sun sect's martial arts to surpass our founder." Chuli scoffed. "Such ambition. It's impossible for me to believe you completely. It's useless even if you swear." "Then what do you want?" the thin elder asked. Chuli said, "Unless I read the Heavenly Sun secret scripture first." "Impossible," the thin elder said in a low voice. "What if you go back on your word after you read our secret scripture?" Chuli scoffed. "If the Heavenly Sun secret scripture is really as mysterious as you say, how can I go back on my word? I can't wait to join the Heavenly Sun sect. I won't leave even if you chase me away." "Impossible." The thin elder shook his head decisively. Chuli sighed. "Then there's no other way. I will never hand over the Taishang Peak's antique study first. Since you won't let me read it first, let's just split up and see who's going to win." The thin elder frowned and stared at him. "Master Chu, you should know that if we really fight, you won't be able to escape." Chuli pointed at the lush mountain peak. "Flying Rock Mountain Range is huge. I don't believe that you can fill it with people. Who can catch up to us if we go in?" "You can't go in," the thin elder said in a low voice. He clapped his hands. Suddenly, 20 middle-aged men appeared in the void. They were from the direction of Flying Rock Mountain Range. They blocked Chu Li's path from several directions. It seemed that they came prepared and had treasures on them. Once the void was locked, it meant that they had all their people. Chu Li made up his mind. He was least afraid of being locked in by the void. This was a trump card for others, but it was insignificant to him. The only time he was locked in the arcane realm was when he could not escape. Nothing else could stop him. However, he would not expose this easily. Otherwise, he would be in trouble when he was hunted down in the future. Chu Li frowned and said coldly, "Looks like I'm going to die here today. Master Chu, you have to think this through. You're still young." The thin elder pointed at himself. "Unlike me, I'm going to be buried soon. Even if we perish together, you'll still be at a disadvantage." The people on Heaven Layer always maintained their peak physical condition. Only when they were about to die would they show signs of aging. The thin elder's appearance meant that he did not have many years left to live. Chu Li said, "You want to get the Taishang Peak's martial arts for free? Dream on." "Master Chu, it seems like we really have to fight to the death." The thin elder's face darkened. He stared at Chu Li seriously. "Then we'll have to cripple you first." As he spoke, he raised his hand slowly. Chu Li stared at him coldly. "Sigh." The thin elder suddenly sighed and shook his head. "Forget it. I really pity your talent. I can't bear to see a young master like you die like this. It's such a waste of talent." Chu Li was calm, as usual. The thin elder said, "If you read the Heavenly Sun scripture first, you'll give us the Taishang Peak's martial arts." Chu Li said, "What do you want?" "I'm most proficient in the Taishang sword scripture. I don't know much about other things." The thin elder asked, "What about the swordless scripture?" Chu Li frowned and thought for a while. He nodded slowly. "I've read it before, but I can only remember the beginning." The thin elder quickly said, "A beginning is good." Chu Li said, "I want to read the Heavenly Sun scripture first. Don't try to fool me with a random scripture. Otherwise, you'll never see the swordless scripture." "All right." The thin elder nodded slowly. "But you'll only be able to see a copy. It can't be the original." Chu Li frowned and shook his head slowly. "No." The thin elder scoffed. "The original is not something that we can read as we please. Chu Li shook his head. I'll only read the original. Chapter 25:03. The thin elder sighed and shook his head. Master Chu, it was originally impossible to take it out. No matter how important the antique study of the Great Peak is, it is far less important to us than the celestial sun scripture. Chu Li frowned and stared at him. The thin elder looked at him calmly and firmly. Both of them were exploring each other's bottom line and fighting for the greatest benefit. Chu Li looked at him and used the omniscient mirror to observe everyone. From what he could see, it was indeed impossible to see the original. The secret book of Heavenly Sun was the treasure of the Church of Heavenly Sunday. How could they show it to outsiders? If he, the Great Peak's disciple, really went berserk and damaged the celestial sun scripture, then all the disciples would become sinners of the church, and they would not be able to answer to their ancestors. Therefore, they would not give him the original no matter what. Chu Li was a little regretful and scoffed. Forget it. A copy is good. The thin elder smiled. Thank you for your understanding, Master Chu. He was secretly relieved. If Chu Li really refused to let it go, it would be a great loss to the sect of Heavenly Sunday. Chu Li's death was not a big deal, but losing the opportunity to obtain the swordless scripture would be a lost opportunity. The swordless scripture was related to a secret technique in the celestial sun scripture. If they could really obtain it, it would be a great improvement to the church. It was an indescribable gain. Compared to this, Chu Li was not worth mentioning. Chu Li said, "Then let me see." "Wait a moment," the thin elder said, and turned to look at a middle-aged man behind him. The middle-aged man looked ordinary and would not attract attention in the crowd. Even if he stood here, it would be easy to ignore him. However, he took out a thin book and handed it to Chu Li. The thin elder took it and handed it to Chu Li. "This is our celestial sun scripture." Chu Li looked at the ordinary middle-aged man, then at the thin elder, then at the thin book, revealing a look of doubt. The thin elder said, "This is our earth messenger, Chung." "Earth messenger?" Chu Li looked at the middle-aged man. The thin elder smiled. "Master Chu, you still don't know our positions? Sun patrol, moon illumination for directions messengers, heaven and earth messengers, plus the chief messenger. We are at the top." Chu Li nodded at the middle-aged man. "My apologies. There's no need to be so polite, young Master Chu." Chung Wenchuan waved his hand and stood there motionlessly. Once again, he became dim and easily overlooked. Chu Li did not dare to underestimate such a person. He lowered his head and looked at the secret book. He already had his suspicions. The Heavenly Sun secret code must be very thick, and this thin book only had a dozen or so pages. How could it possibly be the entire secret code? It was purely to fool him. The skinny elder said, "We have a total of 3 copies. This is the first one. Young Master Chu, please take a look. If you're interested, you could take a look at the second one." "But," he said with a smile. Chu Li scoffed. "Fine, if I'm satisfied, I'll give you the swordless scripture." "That couldn't be better." The thin elder smiled. Chu Li flipped open the thin booklet. It was a set of sword techniques. Apart from this set of sword techniques, there was nothing else. More importantly, there was no heart technique for this set of sword techniques. It was obvious that they were separated. However, the sword technique on it was exquisite beyond compare. It was indeed a rare sword technique. Chu Li frowned. He raised his head and glanced at the skinny elder. He gently tossed the booklet. "It seems that your church is indeed not sincere. There was only one set of sword techniques. Although it was exquisite beyond compare, it was useless to him. No matter how exquisite this sword technique was, he would not cultivate it again. The sword techniques that he had learned were already exquisite enough. In addition to the heavenly demon blade technique, the sword of indifference, and the god-slaying thunder sword. Although this sword technique looked exquisite, it required the coordination of inner energy. Without the strange heart technique, its power would be reduced by several times. Moreover, there was no heart technique attached to it. They were deliberately keeping him in suspense. This method was really not generous enough. It did not show the imposing manner of a first-rate sect. It was obvious that they did not take him seriously. Naturally, It was difficult to see a more profound secret code. The only way was to fight. The sword technique on this is the Heavenly Sun Divine Sword. Is it not exquisite enough? The skinny elder asked. Chu Li shook his head. The Heavenly Sun Divine Sword requires the Heavenly Sun Divine technique, right? If I want to cultivate the Heavenly Sun Divine technique, I must swear to join the Church of Heavenly Sun and become a disciple. There is no other choice, right? Well, that is indeed the case. The skinny elder said, Master Chu, do you still not want to become a disciple of our church? Chu Li said, It is my own choice whether to join or not. I'm not forced to join. Forget it. I will go back to the Great Peak first. Goodbye. He then turned into a white light and shot towards Cheng Wenchuan. Cheng Wenchuan's plain face was calm. He slowly pushed out his palm. The palm wind was gentle like a gentle wind. Bang! Chu Li felt like he had hit an iron wall. His body actually stopped. Chu Li snorted coldly. He raised his hands and activated the Sword of Indifference. The scripture of Heavenly Spirit was also activated. The Sword of Indifference that was condensed from the inner energy of the scripture of Heavenly Spirit shot out. The Sword of Indifference opened the way, and his body followed closely behind. Chi, it was as ear-piercing as a long sword cutting the blade. However, Chu Li passed through the palm energy without any hindrance. He had already escaped the encirclement. The skinny elder's face was solemn. He waved his hand. The rest of the people chased after Chu Li. They did not expect Chu Li to break through Cheng Wenchuan, who was known as the Iron Palm, so easily. Cheng Wenchuan's sun god had reached the stage where the extreme yang produced Yin. It was as gentle as a spring breeze, but as hard as an iron wall. Almost no one could block it, especially those who did not understand it. When they saw such a gentle palm energy, they would think that it was an extreme Yin palm. In the end, it was an extreme yang palm that was indestructible. However, Chu Li easily broke through the palm and escaped. Cheng Wenchuan's face was gloomy. He shouted, Be careful of his sword energy. Everyone nodded. To be able to break through the iron palm, the sword energy was naturally amazing. Chu Li's body movement technique was like lightning. He was getting further and further away from them. He did not expect to break through their encirclement so easily. He knew that these people were too careless. They thought that with so many people surrounding him, he would not be able to escape. Instead, it would be easier for him to escape. More importantly, he changed his face too quickly. They were caught off guard. Cheng Wenchuan saw that Chu Li was getting faster. He could not care about his body anymore. He suddenly sped up and turned into a stream of light that shot in front of Chu Li. He slammed his palm down. It was as gentle as the wind, but it was an extreme yang palm. Chu Li's omniscient mirror saw that he was burning his inner energy. His body moved horizontally in advance to avoid the attack. He did not slow down and stepped into the forest of Flying Rock Mountain. He followed the treetops and went straight up. His speed was getting faster and faster. Cheng Wenchuan scoffed and disappeared in a flash. Bang! The two of them collided and flew out. Chu Li did not expect Cheng Wenchuan to be so reckless. He activated the secret skill twice and increased his speed. He had no choice but to use the heavenly demonic aerial mastery. The void stagnated for a moment and prevented him from getting closer. A few sword of insensibility knocked Cheng Wenchuan away, and he took advantage of the situation to go forward again. A long howl suddenly rang out. Then a cold light flew from the sky and accurately hit him. His omniscient mirror did not notice where the cold light came from. When he realized it, it was already in front of him. He did not even have time to raise his arms to block it. He only saw a short sword shooting at him. His chest hurt and flew out. When he looked down in midair, there was already a hole in his chest. P.S. Update complete. Chapter 2504. Chu Li sighed to himself. No wonder he felt threatened. It was not because this mountain was dangerous, with hidden beasts and formations, but because there was a powerful master lying in ambush. To be able to avoid the omniscient mirror's observation and not make a move, he had the integration of heaven and man, like a rock around him. Once he made a move, it would be a thunderous blow. He could control the short sword like how he controlled the heavenly demonic blade and give him a fatal blow. This person was indeed a powerful master. The hole in his chest was like a gap. All the energy gushed out like a flood. In the blink of an eye, he had no energy left in his body. The omniscient mirror showed that a skinny, slender middle-aged man was leaning against a tree and staring at them from 100 meters away. His eyes were like lightning, and when their gazes met, the man's thin, handsome face was indifferent and his gaze was calm. He looked at him as if he was looking at a stone or a piece of wood, completely emotionless. Chu Li's eyes suddenly flashed with a blue light. Bang! The middle-aged man flew out and spat out a mouthful of blood in the air. Soon after, another cold light flashed. Another cold light soared into the sky and shot towards Chu Li again. Chu Li was already prepared. He observed the short sword and dodged it as soon as it flashed. Although he had no energy left in his body, he forcefully squeezed out a bit of energy and moved a foot to avoid the cold light. His body did not have another hole. Bang! He hit a tree and slid down softly. He ignored the pain and quickly took out a jade bottle. He pulled out the cork and poured out a white pill. He crushed the wax seal and threw it into his mouth. It turned into a breath and swallowed. He pressed his hand on the hole in his chest to stop the energy from gushing out. As the energy disappeared, his body became weaker and weaker. He could not hold on for long. The scripture of the heavenly demon was not very effective in this body. If it was his original body, he would have sealed the wound. Even if he did not heal, he would not bleed and lose his energy. However, he could not do that now. He was still bleeding. He took out another jade bottle and poured out some red ointment. He applied it on the wound and sealed the blood. He let out a long sigh of relief. The omniscient mirror had already seen that the middle-aged man had fallen to the ground and was struggling to get up. His face was as pale as a sheet, and he looked dazed. He had yet to recover from the god-punishing thundersword. Chu Li sneered. He did not have any strength now and could not use his inner energy. His spiritual energy was still there, and the power of the god-punishing thundersword was still there. Although the middle-aged man's sword-riding technique was amazing, it was not as divine as Chu Li's. After both of them fell to the ground, they fell into the forest 100 meters apart. The middle-aged man could not see Chu Li, but Chu Li could see him clearly. Bang! Another muffled sound rang out, and an azure light flashed in his eyes. After the middle-aged man was hit by the god-punishing thundersword, it was as if he had been hit by a huge tree. He flew straight up and crashed into a tree behind him. Once again, he spat out a mouthful of blood. His face was even paler, and his expression was blank. He had already lost the ability to think. Chu Li gritted his teeth and restrained his murderous intent. He focused on channeling his energy and gathered all the energy in his body. He wanted nothing more than to kill the middle-aged man with his sword. However, the situation was critical, and he could not afford to have his way. If he really killed the middle-aged man, what if he did not have the strength to deal with Chengwen Chuan and the others who caught up? Although he ran fast, this middle-aged man who was riding the sword must be from the divine church of the sun. They could communicate with each other and know each other's location, so he would definitely catch up. He could not rely on luck. His top priority now was to heal his injuries and recover his strength so that he could protect his body when he was moving in the void. Otherwise, once he used the void diversion, his body would immediately collapse, and he would have sacrificed this body of the soul lotus for nothing. After the spirit medicine entered his body, it quickly took effect. After a while, the heat in his abdomen surged and began to spread to his limbs and bones. His originally weak and cold body gradually warmed up. He hurriedly urged this heat to circulate and heal the injury on his chest. His expression became more and more ugly, and his eyebrows were tightly knitted. He never thought that the body formed by the soul lotus would be so difficult to repair. If it was in the original body, flesh and blood could be regenerated in a moment. The magical effect of a life and death scripture could increase the speed of growth by 100 times. However, the body of the soul lotus was strange. The life and death scripture seemed to be ineffective. Even if it was effective, it was far from the original body. It was 100 times slower, and the circulation of the life and death scripture only sped up a little. This little improvement was close to nothing, and it was useless. It was impossible to recover before they arrived, and there was no way to recover to the point of moving in the void before they arrived. His expression was ugly, and he could only find another way. The surrounding spirit chi surged, and he let out a long breath. Fortunately, the life and death scripture was not completely destroyed and could still gather spirit chi and quickly convert it into power. However, the hole in his chest was constantly dissipating power. One condensed, and the other dissipated. The two reached a weak balance. He wanted to quickly convert it into inner force, accumulate it into gang chi, and protect his body while moving in the void, but the idea of quickly converting it into inner force and accumulating it into gang chi failed. The protective gang chi was different from the sword chi of the Sword of Indifference. The gang chi formed by converting spirit chi directly into inner force was not strong enough. It needed to be formed in the body through a special mental cultivation method, and once the inner force entered the body, it would directly leak out from the hole in his chest. The only plan now was to fight to the death. Cheng Wenchuan and the others were already close, and they were about to surround him. Chu glanced at the unconscious middle-aged man and let out a long breath. He did not waste any more spiritual energy to kill him, and it was better to save his energy to deal with Cheng Wenchuan and the others. He did not know if he could escape. He did not dare to have too much hope with just his light body technique, because the disciples of the Church of the Sun could summon their companions, and they would constantly surround and intercept him. Even if his inner force was endless, his soul was not, so he had to save it. He turned into a phantom and floated into the air, using the spirit chi to directly convert his spirit chi into a shadow, and shot out. Cheng Wenchuan and the others were still a mile away, and it was impossible for them to catch up. Swoosh! A cold light suddenly shot out. Chu was prepared this time, afraid that there would be a second person lying in ambush, but this sword was faster and more accurate than the previous one. He had just moved half a foot away when the cold light had already arrived and shot his lower abdomen. Swoosh! A hole appeared in his lower abdomen, and blood spurted out. Chu gritted his teeth, and his eyes flashed blue. Bang! A young man 100 meters away flew out and spat out a mouthful of blood in the air. Chu did not expect this sword to be shot by such a young man, and it was even more ruthless than the previous one. If he was not prepared in advance, he would not have been able to dodge it, and would have been shot in the head. He thought that if he was shot in the head like this, there was no way he could survive. With a strong murderous intent, he instantly shot out 3 God-slaying thunder swords, and then another 3 swords. The young man could not take it anymore, and flew out in the air again. He spat out another mouthful of blood, and hung limply on a tree branch. Chu did not stop moving, and while he activated the life and death scripture to convert spirit chi into inner energy, he used his light body technique to move quickly, and at the same time, he took out 2 jades, one for internal consumption and the other for external consumption to slow down his injuries. However, the damage to him was too heavy, and it made things worse. His body could not take it anymore, and what was more frightening was that as his body weakened, so did his soul. Chapter 2505. He was astonished. At first, he thought that this body was like an empty shell. Once the soul entered it, it would be able to leave easily. This was because when the sky inspecting token was up, it would leave this body and return to the outland. Therefore, he never thought about the consequences of this body being injured. At most, his soul would leave the body as if the soul lotus had never existed. However, he did not expect that once this body was injured, his soul would be weakened as well. If this continued, would his soul dissipate as well when his body died? Thinking of this, he was shocked. He tried to think of a solution and did not care about this body anymore. Although souls were rare, he still had a chance to obtain them. He wanted to return to the outland, but realized that his soul could not leave his body. This made him even more shocked. It seemed that he could not abandon this body. He had to heal his injuries as soon as possible. However, this injury was difficult to heal, and it would take a long time to use the life and death scripture to heal it. During this time, he might not be able to return to the outland. Sun Mingwen must be worried, but unfortunately, he cannot send a message back. With the Supreme King Kong as a link, their auras were connected, but he was isolated here and could not sense them. Like a wisp of smoke, he disappeared in the blink of an eye and disappeared from Cheng Wenchuan and the other's sight. Cheng Wenchuan and the others stopped chasing him and went to the young man's side. Sun Jitian was a genius in the church. To be able to ride a sword at the age of 100, he was definitely a rare talent. He was the future pillar of the church. If he really died here, it would be their fault. Although his brother Sun Jihua could also ride a sword, he only mastered it at an advanced age. He could not be mentioned in the same breath as Sun Jitian. They were not worried that Sun Jihua was injured because his cultivation level was extremely high and it was difficult to kill him. However, they were worried that Sun Jitian was injured. Sun Jitian rode the sword with his spirit and talent, but his cultivation level was not high enough. If he was seriously injured, his life would be in danger. If he really died here, they would all be the sinners of the Church of the Sun, little seeking angel. Cheng Wenchuan gently helped him lean against the tree and squatted down. Little seeking angel. Sun Jitian slowly opened his eyes. Cheng Wenchuan was relieved. Little seeking angel, are you okay? Sun Jitian's eyes gradually focused as he looked around. Cheng Wenchuan hurriedly said, "Don't worry. Great seeking angel has already woken up." Sun Jihua's body was strong. Even if he was seriously injured, he could still pull through. Now that he had woken up, they were not worried. Sun Jitian asked, "Where's that guy?" His voice was extremely dry, as if he hadn't drunk water for a long time. Cheng Wenchuan's ordinary face was still calm. He escaped. You can't catch up? Sun Jitian asked. His face was handsome, and he pursed his lips, revealing a hint of coldness. His eyes flashed with a cold light. You still don't dare to give chase? His speed is indeed too fast. Cheng Wenchuan shook his head and sighed. I still underestimated him. They had already sent out enough experts. He, the Earth Envoy, the two angels, the Great Search and Little Search, the 4 envoys, many other experts, but they still couldn't take down a disciple of the Supreme Peak. It was hard to believe. The Heavenly Sun sect was not a second-rate sect, but a first-rate sect. It would have been fine if it was the top master of the greatest peak, but an unknown master from the greatest peak had made them so embarrassed. It was a great humiliation. Sun Jitian was silent for a moment, then shook his head and said, Don't chase anymore. Cheng Wenchuan was stunned. Sun Jitian sighed. It's useless even if we catch up. He's already heavily injured, Cheng Wenchuan said hurriedly. Sun Jitian shook his head. He's heavily injured now, but his ability to kill hasn't weakened at all. If we really meet him, we'll definitely die. He glanced at the experts around him, and they were all looking at him worriedly. He couldn't bear to see them die, so he sighed. None of you will live. Cheng Wenchuan said, Little Sun, he's so heavily injured. No matter how powerful he is, he's only left with one breath, right? No. Sun Jitian sighed. Sun Jitian sighed and said, He's using the spiritual secret technique, as expected of the Supreme Peak. If I'm not wrong, he's cultivating the swordless scripture. The swordless scripture. Everyone was shocked. They all knew that the Divine Church's goal was to obtain the swordless scripture, which was of great importance to the Heavenly Sun sect. Chuli had said that he knew a little about the swordless scripture, but now it seemed like he was lying. Cheng Wenchuan said, Is it really the swordless scripture? It's very likely. Sun Jitian gritted his teeth and said coldly, It's impossible to guard against, and there's no way to track it. It's completely different from his regal sword scripture. I can dodge the regal sword scripture, but I can't dodge the sword just now. If it's really the swordless scripture, then all the more we can't let him go, Cheng Wenchuan said. Sun Jitian shook his head. If you get close, none of you will live. Then let's ask our experts to make a move, Cheng Wenchuan said. Sun Jitian said, No one can block the swordless scripture. Cheng Wenchuan looked at Sun Jitian. Sun Jiqian said slowly. Even if he's wearing a treasure, he might not be able to block it. It's better to let him go first. No, Cheng Chuan said calmly. We can't let go of such an opportunity. He disappeared in a flash as soon as he finished speaking. Sun Jiqian sighed and shook his head, saying no more. The thin elder who spoke to Chuli earlier said, Little Angel Sun, the swordless scripture is too important to us. How can we let him go? Based on what Little Angel Sun thinks, we really can't hold him back. This guy is like an injured beast now. He's more dangerous than usual. Once he catches up to us, he won't hesitate to risk his life. Unless he's carrying a treasure like the soul protection pendant. Otherwise, he shook his head as he spoke. In just a short while, Sun Jiqian's complexion had deteriorated and he was panting. The thin elder put his hand on his wrist, and his expression changed. He quickly took out a spirit medicine and stuffed it into Sun Jiqian's mouth. He sighed. It's really strange. Sun Jiqian's body was unharmed, but his inner energy circulation was weak. Even his blood circulation was slow, as if he was seriously injured and dying. It was really strange, so he could only try using the spirit medicine. Sun Jiqian shook his head. It's useless. Where's my big brother? Big Sun is channeling to heal his injuries, the thin elder said. He's fine. Sun Jiqian frowned. Bring my big brother here. Be careful. The thin elder saw his serious expression and quickly flew over to bring Sun Jihua over. Sun Jihua's complexion was pale and his eyes were dim. He looked like he had not recovered from a serious illness. When he was brought over by the thin elder, he saw Sun Jiqian's pale complexion and quickly asked, Little brother? Big brother, use the requiem incense. Sun Jiqian sighed. All right. Sun Jihua nodded without hesitation. He turned his head and said, Altar Leader Jing, please come to my courtyard. At the top of the tree in the middle of the courtyard, remove that piece of wood from the fork. The thin elder nodded slowly and disappeared. The next moment, Cheng Chuan appeared with a middle-aged man in a white robe. His face was like jade, and he looked like he was carved out of white jade. He was handsome and pure. He stood in the void with his hands behind his back. He looked down at the crowd, and then at the direction where Chuli had gone. P.S. Update complete. Chapter 2506. High Official Xing. Everyone quickly closed fist, saluted respectfully. Not only did the Church of the Sun have messengers, but their top masters were also high officials. Although they did not have much power, they focused on solving problems that the Church of the Sun could not solve. These high officials had bad tempers and would often teach people a lesson. However, the Church of the Sun had always respected the strong. Even if they were beaten or scolded, they would be very obedient, so they were very respectful to these high officials to avoid trouble. Moreover, they respected them from the bottom of their hearts, so they were very respectful. That's enough. Xing Wuxing waved his hand, his eyes still staring in the direction of Chuli. Why didn't you go after him? Sun Jiqian whispered, High Official Xing, I didn't ask him to go after him. Xing Wuxing frowned and looked at him. Why? Sun Jiqian shook his head and smiled bitterly. Going after him is suicide. He is now seriously injured and has the swordless scripture. We can't stop him. It's better to wait for High Official Xing to come and take care of him. Swordless scripture. Xing Wuxing took a step to his side, reached out his hand, and pressed on his forehead, his thumb accurately pressing on his forehead. He was injured and could not resist at all. Before he could even react, his forehead was already pressed. Suddenly, a cool air entered his forehead and flowed into his brain. The pain that was originally splitting apart was immediately relieved, and the clear stream continued to slowly relieve the pain until he finally returned to his usual clarity. Sun Jiqian had always been unconvinced by this high official. He felt that although their martial arts were strong, they had the advantage of age. If he was their age, his cultivation level would definitely be far higher than theirs. He had confidence in himself, so he always acted with pride and arrogance. However, after feeling the clear stream this time, he immediately understood that he was not just a little bit weaker than High Official Xing. In order to heal the injuries of the swordless scripture, one must cultivate the occult spirit skill. However, the occult spirit skill was not something that could be achieved with the accumulation of age. It required enough talent. Without talent, it would be useless no matter how hard one worked. Xing Wuxing took a step to Sun Jihua's side and pointed his finger at his forehead. Sun Jihua's injury was more serious, and he was almost unconscious. After being pointed, he immediately woke up. His eyes widened in gratitude, and he gave a fist salute. Xing Wuxing said lightly, "All right, hurry up and heal." Sun Jihua nodded and closed his eyes to circulate his energy. Sun Jiqian regained his composure and sighed. "Master Xing, be careful." Xing Wuxing said calmly, "I was just about to experience the Swordless Sutra." As soon as he finished speaking, he disappeared in front of the crowd in a flash and appeared in front of Chu Li the next moment. Chu Li's body moved like lightning. He was getting further and further away from the people behind him, but he did not feel excited at all. The continuous weakening of his body affected his soul as well. It was an irreversible weakening. He had tried many secret arts. Whether it was the Mahavirokana's immobility scripture, the life and death scripture, or the earth matrix and reincarnation scripture, none of them could stop the weakening. The physical body, formed by the soul lotus, was exceptionally strange. When it worked at will, it was even better than the original body. However, once it was injured, it was extremely difficult for it to recover. Its absorption of spiritual qi was especially slow and sluggish. Thus, he felt that although it could imitate a body of flesh and blood, it was not a real body of flesh and blood. Despair filled his heart, but he continued to use the life and death scripture to condense spiritual qi into inner energy, forming dozens of invisible swords in the air, ready to deal with the pursuers. The Heavenly Sun sect would never let him go. As soon as Xing Wuxing appeared, all the sword of insensibility surged toward him. Chu Li was very sensitive to the void and could control it. As soon as Xing Wuxing approached, he sensed it. He used the heavenly demonic air manipulation technique to stop Xing Wuxing from appearing, but Xing Wuxing did not notice. Bam, 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 bam. The sword energy that filled the sky collided with Xing Wuxing's protective energy barrier, producing a dull sound like stones being thrown into a deep well. Chu Li's eyes flashed blue. Bam, bam, bam. Several god-slaying thunder swords collided with it. Xing Wuxing's body shone brightly like a sun, shining so brilliantly that no one dared to look at him directly. Chu Li's heart sank when he saw Xing Wuxing's condition through the omniscient mirror. This guy's cultivation level was high, even higher than Song Wuji's. More importantly, he had treasures with him, and it seemed like he had cultivated the secret spirit skill. Xing Wuxing suddenly laughed. Chu Li's sword energy did not stop, falling on Xing Wuxing like rain falling on a banana leaf. Xing Wuxing's protective energy seemed endless, allowing the sword energy to fall on his body. He laughed and looked at Chu Li. "This is the swordless scripture? You do have some skills, but unfortunately, you haven't cultivated it to perfection." He was secretly shocked. He did not expect the swordless scripture to be so powerful. He was almost injured, but looking at Chu Li's shaky appearance, it was obvious that he could not hold on any longer. He was holding on with his last breath. As long as he dispelled his confidence, his breath would be gone, and he would collapse immediately. Chu Li smiled, his eyes flashing blue again. The power of his soul was affected by this body and was weakened like a broken cliff. It was not even 1/10 of its peak power. The power of the god punishing Thundersword was indeed greatly reduced, but even so, it was not something that a normal expert could withstand. This guy could withstand it because he had treasures to protect himself. This was his helplessness against the previous sect. If one had a strong foundation, they would have many treasures. They could always find treasures that could restrain themselves, and this might be the key to life and death. Bam, 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 bam. The continuous muffled sounds shook people's souls and spread far. The people in the distance did not dare to come close. They were not afraid of masters, but they were afraid of the swordless scripture. Xing Wuxing shouted, "It's my turn." He struck with his palm. Chu Li felt his surroundings become sticky, as if the void was condensing. He was under pressure from all directions, about to be squeezed into a meat patty. The heavenly demonic flight technique was activated, but it was useless. The circulation of spiritual energy was also useless. This palm energy was extremely strange. It was a power that Chu Li had never seen before, and it was impossible to guard against. If it was before, he could directly shift and leave, but now he did not dare to shift. If he did, his body would collapse. The spiritual energy condensed by the life and death scripture could not reach the level of protection, and his body would collapse in the process of shifting in the void. The strange power was getting stronger, and he found it more difficult to breathe. His vision darkened, so the sword of insensibility and the god-slaying thunder sword became more violent, but it still could not break through Xing Wuxing's protective energy. Bam! Chu Li suddenly disappeared. Xing Wuxing hurriedly chased after him. His palm energy was mysterious, and it was not that easy to get rid of. Once he encountered his opponent, it would be like maggots attached to a bone, chasing him relentlessly, and would not stop until he destroyed his opponent. He only needed to follow the aura of the palm energy to find Chu Li. However, when he focused and sensed, he found that it was empty, and he could not sense his palm energy. It was really strange, but it could not be destroyed by Chu Li. Chu Li was now on the verge of death, and could not destroy his palm energy at all. Could it be that he destroyed Chu Li? But even if he destroyed Chu Li, he should not be unable to sense it at all. He shook his head, but there was nothing he could do. Chu Li had a flash of inspiration. He used the power that was tightly binding him as a protective energy barrier, and disappeared in the void. After shifting 100 miles, he suddenly reappeared, and his body was already on the verge of collapse. Chapter 25:07. Highly recommended. When he woke up, he used the omniscient mirror to observe a quiet valley. Birds were singing, flowers were fragrant, and a stream was gurgling. It was a pleasant scenery, like a paradise. Chu Li felt relaxed and happy just by looking at it. He realized that his injuries seemed to have healed. He quickly looked down at his chest. The hole had healed, and the wound was almost invisible. It was amazing. He felt that he did not lie down for too long. The omniscient mirror carefully observed his surroundings and then looked up at the sky. He concentrated for a moment and shook his head in the end. According to his feeling, he should have been unconscious for 3 days. Within these 3 days, under the situation where he did not circulate or use the life and death scripture, he had actually recovered. It was truly miraculous and unbelievable. The root of all this might be the old man who was fishing by the pool. The old man was thin and slender. He had silver-white hair, a thin face, and kind eyes. He looked like a virtuous monk. He sat quietly by the pool, holding the fishing rod motionlessly. A gust of wind blew. Only the fishing line swayed gently, but the surface of the pool was as calm as a mirror. There were no ripples in the pool. It was like an ancient mirror quietly lying flat, reflecting the blue sky and white clouds. Chu Li used the omniscient mirror to observe the old man. He wanted to see through his heart, but he was blocked by an invisible force. The old man's body seemed to be hazy, as if he had turned into a brilliance. He could not see through him. Chu Li frowned. The old man had a strange skill and a high cultivation level. However, he looked like he did not know martial arts. It was obvious that he had amazing skills that could hide his aura and hide his cultivation level. If he did not have the omniscient mirror, he would have been fooled. He thought that he might have been healed by the old man. If he could heal such a serious injury, he must have some kind of medicine or divine healing skill. Either way, he saved his life. If he did not heal him, he would have been dead by now. He might not even have the chance to be resurrected. It was hard to tell if the life and death scripture could work. He coughed softly, breaking the silence of the valley. The thin old man sat motionlessly by the pool like a stone statue. Chu Li did not say anything else, as he quickly examined his body. Apart from being slightly weaker and his cultivation level regressing by 1 step, he did not suffer any other injuries. He could circulate his energy whenever he wanted and teleport away whenever he wanted. Once he made up his mind, he used the omniscient mirror to observe his body carefully again. Every time he observed his body, there was nothing out of the ordinary. Only then did he let out a sigh of relief. He was really afraid that the old man would do something while he was unconscious. As the saying goes, one must always be wary of others. Chuli did not let his guard down just because the old man saved his life. After a quarter of an hour, the old man lightly shook his hand. Immediately, a snow-white and flawless silver snowflake flew out of the pool and landed on the grass. It struggled and jumped, jumping 10 feet high with great strength. Chuli raised his eyebrows. This silver snow was a little strange. It was much stronger than the usual fish. It did not look big, but it was full of strength. The silver-haired old man gently stretched out his hand, and the silver fish stopped struggling and became motionless. He picked up the silver fish and tossed it into the air. The silver fish landed in a crock nearby. The crock was filled with water, and the charcoal under it was quickly lit up. Then, the fish began to be cooked. In a short while, a fragrant aroma filled the air. It did not smell like fish at all. Chuli was tickled by the strange aroma, so he got out of bed and went to the crock. He fist saluted. "Thank you, Senior." The silver-haired old man had been staring at the crock. He did not seem to care about Chuli's fist salute. He waved his hand and continued to stare at the crock. "You don't have to say anything. It's nothing. Have you recovered from your injuries?" Chuli nodded. "I'll be fine after some rest. It's not easy to nurse your body back to health," the silver-haired old man said. He kept staring at the crock as if he was looking at a peerless treasure. He did not care about the steam coming out of the crock and only stared at it. Chuli sighed. "It seems that Senior has seen through it. It's the soul lotus," the silver-haired old man said. "There are advantages and disadvantages." Chuli nodded. He cultivated the earth matrix and reincarnation scripture and a life and death scripture. Naturally, he knew about the harmony between yin and yang. No matter how magical the soul lotus was, it was impossible for it to be flawless. It was just like how there was no perfect person in the world. The soul lotus was magical, but its disadvantages were fatal. The silver-haired old man said, "You're lucky to have met me. If it was someone else, they would not have been able to do anything to the soul lotus." Chuli asked, "Senior, how did you cure it?" This was what he was most concerned about. He would be able to treat it if he was injured in the future. "It's this fish." The silver-haired old man pointed at the crock and said, "This 9 underworld fish is a rare treasure. It's used to repair damage to the soul lotus. Without this fish, it's almost impossible for the soul lotus to recover." Chuli frowned. "Senior, do you know why the soul lotus has such a defect?" "Who knows?" The silver-haired old man said, "Everything is decided by the heavens." Chuli nodded slowly. The mystery behind it was indescribable. He could only say that it was the power of creation. "Then how did you know that the 9 underworld fish can cure the soul lotus?" Chuli asked. The silver-haired old man said, "Of course I heard about it. I didn't expect it to be effective. It's your fortune." Chuli fist saluted. "Thank you, Senior. Stop talking and sit down. You'll be fine after drinking this crock." The silver-haired old man waved his hand impatiently. He was still staring at the crock. Chuli sat beside the old man. He looked at the crock and asked, "I haven't asked for your name." "Gu Sitong." The silver-haired old man scoffed. "You're too noisy." Chuli could only remain silent. He looked at the crock that was getting louder and the aroma was getting more alluring. He almost wanted to snatch it and swallow it without caring if it was hot or not. Gu Sitong glanced at him and said coldly, "It's not time yet." Chuli nodded. Time passed by amidst the sound of flowing water. He felt that each day was like a year, and every second was a great torment. The aroma of the earthen jar was a fatal temptation to him, and he could not resist it. He had never desired it so much before. Even at this time, he remained clear-headed. He used Mahavairokkana's immobility scripture. He clearly knew that this was probably the soul lotus's instinctive reaction to the 9 underworld fish. It directly affected his body and mind. Fortunately, his soul was strong enough to not be affected by the smell. However, his clear mind did not reduce the torment. It was only an hour, but he felt like it had been more than a year. His body was already trembling. The uncontrollable strong desire almost drowned his consciousness. If it was not for Mavarokhana's immobility scripture, he would have pounced on it. It's done. Gu Sidong suddenly lifted the crock and left the burning charcoal. The gurgling steam began to spread. Gu Sidong slapped the crock. If Chuli was not clear-headed, he would have gone forward to stop him. He was afraid that the crock of fish would spill on the ground. Bang! The white steam from the crock suddenly reversed and entered the crock. Gu Sidong nodded in satisfaction and passed it to Chuli. Take it and drink it in one go. Chuli quickly reached out and took it. He let out a long sigh and smiled. Thank you, Senior Gu. You can leave after drinking this. Gu Sidong said calmly. You should be able to recover. Chuli nodded. He quickly opened the lid of the crock and was about to drink the soup. He realized that the crock was not hot. It was not scalding as he had imagined. Instead, it was cold. Chapter 25:08. Male. His body was filled with a strong desire. He wanted to swallow the whole jar, but he was still conscious and did not lose his mind. He stared at the jar and did not sense any danger. He raised it to the sky and drank it. One jar was not much, only about half a caddy. He finished it in one gulp. Every cell in his body seemed to be cheering and singing. His body was as light as a feather. He could not help but howl at the sky. The howl was like thunder. Noisy, Gu Sidong scoffed. Chuli stopped howling and gave a fist salute again. Although he could not read Gu Sidong's mind, he could feel the danger from him. Gu Sidong's cultivation level was higher than his. If Gu Sidong wanted to kill him, he could only run for his life. Back then, he did not even have the strength to fight back. If Gu Sidong wanted to kill him, he would not have waited until now. Even so, he did not lose his vigilance. He had to be cautious unless he was facing Shao Qi, Sun Mingyue, and Lu Yuro. He was wary of everyone, but never showed it. Gu Sidong waved his hand. No need to thank me. Chuli sighed. This 9 underworld fish is amazing. It's only amazing for the soul lotus, but not for others. Gu Sidong said indifferently, there is nothing in the world that isn't like this. Everything has its weakness. The 9 underworld fish, when eaten by ordinary people, can only nourish their blood and qi. The effect is not miraculous, but it is extremely beneficial to the soul lotus. Chuli nodded. I've been worried about how to heal the soul lotus body. There's a special medicine for the soul lotus body. Gu Sidong said, you don't know your limits, so you didn't find it. Carry a bottle of scarlet powder with you, so you won't be so embarrassed next time. Chuli nodded. This time was too embarrassing. More importantly, he did not know the soul lotus body had such a drawback. He sighed. The soul lotus body is a soul prison. You know about this? Gu Sidong glanced at him. If you know about this, you should know that the soul lotus body needs scarlet powder. Chuli sighed. Is it really a soul prison? It's best for the soul and body to merge. Gu Sidong said, isn't the body a soul prison? Whose soul can leave the body? Chuli said, I heard that there's a secret skill that allows the soul to leave the body. That kind of secret technique is very difficult to cultivate. Gu Sidong said lightly, moreover, what is the use of having the soul leave the body? The soul lotus can make the soul and body even more intimate, which will make one's aptitude even better. Chuli frowned and sighed. He nodded slowly. For ordinary people, this was indeed a wonderful thing. The closer the soul was to the body, the more refined the perception and control of the body would be. The same exquisite movements could be easily performed by those whose soul was closer to the body, but others could not. If the connection between the soul and the body wasn't close enough, one might never be able to learn those exquisite movements. More importantly, the closer the soul was to the body, the faster the body's reaction would be. When it came to fighting and killing, This was a matter of life and death. Sometimes, if one's reaction was just the slightest bit slower, it would mean the difference between life and death. But this little bit of beauty was fatal to him. The last time his soul left his body, he did not feel anything strange. It was only after this time that he realized the drawbacks of the soul lotus. Of course, he could not blame the Tan Huadavine sect. They did not know that his soul could return to the heavens beyond heaven. Gu Sidong said, "You don't look happy." Chu Li shook his head and smiled bitterly. "I'm just lamenting how troublesome it is to be injured. With the blood scarlet powder, you could be like a normal person. Moreover, the blood scarlet powder is not an expensive medicine. It's very common. It's just that you don't know how to use it, which is why you suffered such a huge loss." Chu Li nodded and did not say anything. Gu Sidong said, "Also, the body of the soul lotus has another advantage. Every time you suffer a serious injury, the body and soul will become stronger and more integrated. After a few more serious injuries, the soul and body will become one. Your cultivation will improve by leaps and bounds, and your movements will also be more agile." Chu Li smiled bitterly. This was even more troublesome. After this injury, his soul could not leave his body. But there's also a problem. Gu Sidong said, "When the body is dead, the soul is gone too. The soul can't enter the cycle of reincarnation. This is the price of the soul lotus." Chu Li nodded slowly. Gu Sidong asked, "Are you okay now?" Chu Li quickly smiled. "I've recovered." Gu Sidong nodded. "Since you've recovered, you can fight." Chu Li raised his eyebrows. "Do you have enemies?" "They're not looking for me. They're looking for you." Gu Sidong pointed outside and said, "They've been waiting outside for a few days, waiting for you to come out." Chu Li said, "They're quite patient. Deal with them, lest they disturb the peace outside." Gu Sidong scoffed. Chu Li fist saluted and left the ravine. He saw Xing Wuxing standing on the peak of the opposite mountain. He took a step forward and approached him, calmly looking at Xing Wuxing. When Xing Wuxing saw him, he looked him up and down and scoffed. "Recovered." Chu Li nodded. "Do you want to continue?" Xing Wuxing frowned and shook his head, sighing, "There's no need." Chu Li said, "With your cultivation level, you have a high chance of winning. Why don't you fight?" Xing Wuxing's cultivation level was higher than his, and he was proficient in that strange palm energy. Chu Li still had not figured out how to break it. Of course, he would not be trapped under normal circumstances. Back then, he was heavily injured and could not shift. Now he could shift. Although his palm energy could lock the void, it could not lock the heavenly demonic aerial manipulation. Whether you fight or not, you're going to die. Xing Wuxing scoffed. "You're happy that you're saved, aren't you?" Chu Li smiled. "It's always a good thing to be alive. Sometimes being alive is better than being dead," Xing Wuxing said. Chu Li frowned and looked at him, using the omniscient mirror to observe. The bright light shrouded his body, and he could not see through his thoughts. He felt that Xing Wuxing's expression was not right, and his words were strange too. With the omniscient mirror, Chu Li's ability to see through people's minds had reached a magical level. Even without looking into the mind, he could see through the person's expression and subtle movements. "Is there something wrong with that senior Gu?" Chu Li asked slowly. "He's not that stupid after all. Unfortunately, he's unlucky." Xing Wuxing smiled faintly. Chu Li scoffed. "What's his background?" "If I'm not mistaken, he should be a remnant of the Holy Church of Qinji." Xing Wuxing said, "I didn't expect to meet him here. I'm not waiting for you here. I'm waiting for him." Chu Li's expression changed. "The Holy Church of Qinji? The Holy Church of Qinji hasn't been wiped out?" According to the information he obtained from the Tower Master of Heaven Shaking, the Qinji skill was the secret skill of the Qinji sect. He did not expect the Holy Church of Qinji to exist here. When he heard the name, he thought of the Qinji skill and puppets. From the words remnant that Xing Wuxing mentioned, he knew that the Holy Church of Qinji must have been wiped out like the Qinji sect. Xing Wuxing said, "There are always some people who are lucky. This is one of them. I don't know if you're lucky or sad that he saved you." As he spoke, there was a hint of sympathy in his eyes. Chapter 2509. He immediately thought of the reason why Xing Wuxing looked at him this way. Xing Wuxing sighed. The holy church of Qi was destroyed not only because of their secretive methods and evil behavior, but also because of a more important reason. Chu Li said, "I'd like to hear the details." Xing Wuxing shook his head and looked at him with pity. "It's also because the diversion spell can't be broken. Those who are affected by the diversion spell will become their puppet unless they commit suicide." Chu Li frowned. "Can't resist it. There's no other way." Xing Wuxing shook his head and said, "As far as I know, the traction spell doesn't control your mind, but your body. Once the traction spell is activated, you will lose control of your body, as if you had become the other party's body. Everything you do will be based on his thoughts. Think about it. What kind of situation will that be?" Chu Li could not help but shudder. Xing Wuxing scoffed. "I know you've cultivated the swordless scripture, so you must have a strong spirit. Unfortunately, it's useless. No matter how strong your spirit is, you can't resist the diversion spell." Chu Li's face was extremely gloomy. Xing Wuxing said, "If I were you, I wouldn't have to think about how to escape. It's useless." Chu Li nodded slowly. Of course, he understood that if his opponent used the diversion spell, he could sense him through his aura and come to him directly unless he abandoned his body. Unfortunately, his body was now one with his soul and could not be separated from his body. Once his body was destroyed, his soul would be destroyed too. He quickly thought of a way to deal with it. Although it might not be true, and it might be Xing Wuxing's provocation, judging from Xing Wuxing's behavior, he was an arrogant person who disdained lying. Since he said so, it was most likely true. Even if it was fake, he had a plan for the worst. Even if Gu Sidong saved him, he did not let his guard down. Of course, even if he was really from the Holy Church of Qi, he might not have cast the diversion spell on him. Everything needed to be judged carefully. He could not be affected by his emotions and act impulsively. The worst-case scenario was that he was affected by the diversion spell. He knew about the diversion spell, but unfortunately, there was no way to remove it in the chant. It seemed like he could only use it but not remove it. This might also be the reason for the destruction of the Qinji divine cult and the Qinji sect. Just like using poison, one could only poison but not detoxify it. Wouldn't that mean that one would offend everyone and become everyone's enemy, bringing about their own destruction? After being hit by the traction art, the only way to escape was to commit suicide and have one's soul leave one's body. In the past, this would have been very easy. All one had to do was find a soul lotus and switch to another body. In any case, one's soul did not belong here. However, he couldn't do it now. If he wanted to break the traction spell, he had to find a way to leave the soul lotus. When Xing Wuxing saw Chu Li's calm expression and how he was only thinking quietly, he was filled with admiration. If it were anyone else, they would have been shocked. "Are you hoping that he won't use the distraction spell on you?" Xing Wuxing snorted. Chu Li had already activated the traction technique's incantation to examine his body, not leaving out a single spot. He could vaguely sense a strange energy movement at his precordium, and this energy movement was the seed of the traction technique. Chu Li's heart sank, but his expression did not change. He only nodded lightly. "Heh." Xing Wuxing laughed and shook his head. Chu Li said, "The people from the Church of Temptation might not use the distraction spell on everyone they see, right? As far as I know, the distraction spell has a limit too. It can only control one person, so you must be extremely careful. You're the most ideal candidate for the puppet." Xing Wuxing sighed. "It's also very dangerous to use the distraction spell. Once it's blocked by the opponent, you'll die from the backlash if your spirit is stronger than his." Chu Li frowned and nodded. Xing Wuxing scoffed. "See? You passed out first, so he can use the distraction spell without any hindrance. Moreover, your cultivation level is high, and you have the secret skill of the swordless scripture. If I were him, I wouldn't let you go." Chu Li said, "What if he already had a puppet in the past?" Xing Wuxing sneered. "If he had a puppet, he wouldn't have saved you. Do you really think that the disciples of the Church of Temptation have a bodhisattva's heart and pity the state of the universe?" Chu Li said, "Even if he's a disciple of the Church of Temptation, there must be good and bad ones. The cultivators of the distraction spell usually change their temperament. They only know how to manipulate and control. They have no feelings. Xing Wuxing curled his lips and sneered. They see themselves as shepherds, and everyone around them are sheep. Chu Li sighed. What's the point of saying all this? Since you're his puppet, why should I fight with you? Xing Wuxing said in disdain. What's the point of winning? Chu Li could not help but laugh. What puppet? I'm not that easy to be a puppet. Do you think you can resist the distraction spell? Xing Wuxing said in disdain. It's useless. No matter how you struggle, it's useless. You might as well listen to orders. Chu Li said, My body is condensed from the soul lotus. What a pity. Xing Wuxing shook his head. Then he won't let you go. The body condensed from the soul lotus. His distraction spell doesn't just control your body, it can even control your spirit. Chu Li frowned without saying a word. He pondered and said, How can I make my soul leave this body? He was forced to ask this. He could tell that Xing Wuxing was not interested in fighting him, but wanted to deal with Gu Sitong. Therefore, he might tell the truth to deal with Gu Sitong. Xing Wuxing smiled. You want your soul to leave? Chu Li nodded. Xing Wuxing frowned and thought for a while. I think there's a strange item called the soul separating grass. It can make the soul leave the soul lotus. Chu Li asked, Where can I find the soul separating grass? My church has the soul separating grass. Xing Wuxing frowned. But do you really want to use it? Chu Li slowly said, I'd rather die than become a puppet. You're ambitious. Xing Wuxing gave him a thumbs up and said, If it were me, I'd make the same choice. However, there's a way for you to get rid of the distraction spell, and that's to kill the person who performed it. Chu Li shook his head. Xing Wuxing said, All right, I'll lend you a helping hand. He took a step forward and disappeared. After a while, he reappeared with a small blade of grass in his hand. It looked like a normal withered grass, and there was nothing special about it. However, Chu Li felt a unique force. His soul that was tightly connected to his body suddenly shook. It felt like it was leaving his body, as if there was a barrier between him and his body. It was amazing. You can use it now. Xing Wuxing sighed. I respect that you're a man. Get rid of your body now, or you won't stand a chance when he comes. You won't be able to die, even if you want to. Chu Li took the soul separating grass and slowly said, Do you want to kill him? You can't help me. Xing Wuxing shook his head. Chu Li said, I can isolate the force so he won't be able to sense it. Really? Xing Wuxing's expression changed, and his eyes lit up. You can really set up a formation? Chu Li slowly nodded. He thought about it, and the only way to get rid of the force was a formation. Then why use the soul separating grass? Xing Wuxing quickly said, Just set up a formation to isolate him. I'll deal with him. He saw the hope of killing Gu Sitong. If Chu Li was really here, he could only escape if Chu Li and Gu Sitong worked together. That was why he said those words to encourage Chu Li to leave Gu Sitong. Chapter 25:10. Male. Chu Li shook his head. He used the soul separating grass to separate his soul so that he could return to the outland. Sun Mingwe was very anxious over there. Fortunately, the time difference here was 12 times. What do you have in mind? Xing Wuxing asked. When he heard that Chu Li could set up a formation to isolate aura, his attitude towards Chu Li suddenly changed. The Church of the Sun naturally knew about his formation, but as a high official, Xing Wuxing did not bother to understand. In his eyes, Chu Li was just a master from the northern region and a stray dog. He could just kill him. He did not expect that he did not kill Chu Li and even let him escape. However, it was also fortunate that he met the remnants of the Nianji Church. Killing a master from the northern region and killing the remnants of the Nianji Church were worlds apart. Not to mention other things, just the rewards from each sect was enough to make him wake up laughing. In order to eliminate the Nianji Church, all the sects that participated in the encirclement had set up great rewards. As long as they could kill the remnants of the Nianji Church, the rewards would be shocking. The key was not money, but some rare herbs and spirit fruits. With these rare herbs and spirit fruits, It was no different from having a few more lives and increasing one's cultivation level. It was a temptation that no one could resist. If they had the time to kill Chu Li, they might as well save their energy to kill Gu Sidong. Chu Li asked, "Can you handle him alone?" Of course, Xing Wuxing scoffed. Because of Chu Li, he was worried that he could not take down Gu Sidong and let him escape. Otherwise, he would have made a move long ago. With Chu Li around, Gu Sidong would be very difficult to deal with. The puppet would risk its life and even perish together with Chu Li. With Chu Li's cultivation level, if he really perished together with Gu Sidong, he would definitely be injured and lose the opportunity to kill Gu Sidong. Chu Li nodded. "I need to set up a formation to isolate aura and wait for him to come. Then, I'll activate another formation and trap him in it. I'll need you to hold him back for now." "That's a good idea." Xing Wuxing nodded. "You won't kill me too, right?" Chu Li said, "With the soul separating grass, we're even. What's the point of killing you?" "That's true." Xing Wuxing nodded. Chu Li said, "I'll set up the formation now. I hope I can make it in time. Let's get some jade pendants first." "Please wait a moment," Xing Wuxing said. Under the stimulation of the generous reward, he was unusually enthusiastic and could not wait for Chu Li to immediately set up a formation to kill Gu Sidong. In the blink of an eye, he returned with more than 10 jade pendants in his hands, all of which were the finest quality. Chu Li did not stand on ceremony and began to make a talisman. He was done in 15 minutes. Then, he said, "Once I set up the formation, he'll be tricked and come over. Be careful. Come on." Xing Wuxing's spirit was lifted. Chu Li tossed the 6 paths jade pendants into the air. His body instantly disappeared, and so did his aura. It was as if he had completely disappeared from the world. Xing Wuxing was surprised. This Chu Li's formation Dao was much more profound than what he had imagined. Just 6 small formation talismans were able to conceal his body, making it impossible to sense him. He just didn't know if Gu Sidong could sense him. Chu Li was also a test. Gu Sidong planted the seed of the traction technique on him. The formation of the seed not only required a unique heart technique, but also the seed. Without the seed, it would be useless for others to obtain the traction technique. It was just like Xing Wuxing, who had the traction technique but could not use it. The formation of the seed, on the other hand, required the mother seed as a guide. Without the mother seed, one could not form a sun seed. The traction technique was extremely mysterious. The sun seed could control others as a puppet, while the mother seed could pass on its cultivation level and comprehension. However, the mother seed could not control others, it could only be passed on, and it could form multiple mother seeds. On the other hand, the sun seed could only form one. A master could pass on all his cultivation level and comprehension to his disciple through multiple mother seeds. The disciple would only be able to form a sun seed with the inheritance of the mother seed, and then be able to use the traction technique. However, the seed that Gu Sidong planted in Xing Wuxing was not the mother seed, but the sun seed. Xing Wuxing was proficient in the traction technique, so he knew at once. Therefore, he immediately concluded that Gu Sidong was harboring evil intentions. Xing Wuxing was right. Even if Xing Wuxing saved him, it was to turn him into a puppet. Chu Li naturally would not foolishly spare him. As long as Xing Wuxing was alive, Xing Wuxing would become a puppet. Indeed, there was no way to break it. This was also the path of death of the Divine Church of Traction and the Traction sect. The traction technique was too overbearing. While he was thinking about this, Gu Sidong suddenly appeared. His eyes were like lightning, and his benevolent face was full of coldness. He was on guard at the same time. Chu Li's whereabouts were all under his control, and he could sense it clearly. It was indeed a little strange that he suddenly disappeared here. He must have been killed, and with Chu Li's cultivation level, he was actually killed by someone. This person must be a formidable opponent. However, Chu Li was not a good person. Even if he died in the hands of his opponent, he would not let his opponent escape unscathed. He must have been injured. It would be best if he could take advantage of the situation and kill Chu Li. If Chu Li was unconscious, he could use the traction technique. It would be a blessing to change to a stronger puppet. He was inexplicably excited and could not wait to rush over, lest he miss the opportunity. Ah! Xing Wuxing suddenly sneered and slapped down with his palm. Gu Sidong felt danger as soon as he appeared. His excitement was doused with a basin of cold water. He raised his palm and slapped, wanting to test the strength of the person in front of him. However, his face became gloomier and his heart sank. Looking at the cultivation level of the person in front of him, it was higher than his, and he did not seem to be injured. Could it be that he had directly killed Chu Li with one palm? Thinking of this, he became vigilant and wanted to escape. The reason why he could live until now was that he was cautious. Otherwise, no matter how strong his martial arts were, he would have been destroyed. He took action as soon as he thought of this. His palm energy was as violent as a strong wind, and it whistled. Then, he flashed and was about to move into the void. His body paused, but he did not disappear. His expression changed slightly. Ha! Xing Wuxing laughed again. He had already used a treasure to lock the void. Since this old man could live for so long, he must be very good at escaping. Therefore, he had prepared a treasure to lock the void, and it worked. Suddenly, several jade pendants appeared in the void. They flashed and disappeared in the air, as if they had moved into the void. Then, Gu Sidong felt the scene in front of him change, and he suddenly realized that it was a formation. Xing Wuxing did not feel anything, and there was nothing strange around him. Chu Li appeared beside him. I've trapped him, but he must have a treasure that might be able to restrain the formation. We need to end this quickly. All right. Xing Wuxing nodded hurriedly. Chu Li threw a jade pendant to him. Take this, he won't notice. It's best to kill him in one hit. Understood. Xing Wuxing nodded vigorously, as if he had seen a great reward. He held the jade pendant and rushed toward Gu Sidong. Bang! Gu Sidong turned around abruptly. A long sword had already appeared in his sleeve, and it shot toward Xing Wuxing like a poisonous snake. Xing Wuxing sneered and swung it. Bang! The long sword and the sleeve collided, and a dull sound was heard, like two pieces of wood colliding. Chapter 25:11. Yo! Chu Li stood in the formation and observed the two of them fighting with the omniscient mirror. He wanted to take the opportunity to see their actual strength. Both of their cultivations were a notch higher than his. If they were to really fight, unless he could restrain the other party and use the god-punishing thunder sword or other strange techniques to subdue the enemy, he had no chance of winning just by relying on his cultivation. Who knew if they had any secret techniques or not? Although he had read the travel notes that came with the Heavenly Patrol archive, they were very brief and didn't touch much on martial arts. That was why he didn't understand the martial arts on First Heaven and couldn't find a way to deal with them. It was a rare opportunity for him to watch the battle between the top masters. Even though he was watching, he was still vigilant. Since Gu Sidong had an array-breaking treasure and could break his own formation, he would definitely become a puppet if he was seen. Therefore, he was prepared to escape at any time and even secretly help Xing Wuxing. He couldn't rest in peace if Gu Sidong didn't die. Bang, 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 bang. Xing Wuxing and Gu Sidong's palm energy collided like thunder, showing their shocking cultivation levels. They were both a little indignant and wanted to crush each other directly. Xing Wuxing didn't believe it. He didn't expect the surviving member of the chain pattern holy cult to have such a high cultivation level. He was just a guy who relied on the chain pattern technique, but his cultivation level wasn't inferior to his. He was indeed a disaster. The two of them exchanged more than 100 blows, but it was still difficult to determine the winner. Xing Wuxing's expression was solemn, but his heart trembled. He suddenly realized that it was much harder to get the big reward than he imagined. No wonder this old guy survived for so long. He was indeed difficult to deal with. Thinking about this, he took out a green ball and tossed it into the air. Bang! His surroundings seemed to shake as if he was in a lake, and the lake rippled. A white light suddenly burst out from Gu Sidong's body, followed by a crisp pop sound as if something had broken. It was his protective treasure that had blocked this attack. Good, good. Xing Wuxing gritted his teeth and scoffed. You have quite a lot of good stuff. His attack just now could knock his opponent unconscious. It was an attack that targeted the opponent's mind and couldn't be blocked if he was caught off guard. However, his opponent seemed to be prepared and had a protective treasure that blocked the attack. Gu Sitong asked, "Who are you?" "Xing Wuxing of the Heavenly Sun sect." "What gall? Aren't you afraid of this old man's revenge?" Gu Sitong said coldly. Xing Wuxing chuckled. "I'm afraid you won't come." Gu Sitong's silence made Xing Wuxing's heart tremble. It seemed that he had to get rid of Gu Sitong no matter what this time. Otherwise, if Gu Sitong really came for the Heavenly Sun sect, it would really be impossible to guard against, and there would be endless trouble. If his disciple really died because of this, then it would be his fault. Chu Li frowned as he looked at the battlefield. It seemed that Xing Wuxing would not be able to defeat Gu Sitong. It seemed that he would need his help. However, once he showed himself, there would be endless trouble and he would only add to the chaos. He would not show himself unless it was absolutely necessary. It's impolite not to reciprocate. Gu Sitong snorted and took out an object from his bosom. It was a black stone, and he crushed it fiercely. Bang! A crisp sound rang out, and Xing Wuxing couldn't help but sway. Caught off guard, Gu Sitong had already closed in on him and struck his chest with his palm. Bam! Xing Wuxing flew out. He tried his best to control his body and block the follow-up attack, but it was too late. Gu Si took a step in front of him and struck his chest with a series of palm strikes, causing Xing Wuxing to spit out blood. Chu Li was in the formation, frowning, but he did not make a move. He knew that if he went out now, he would only be courting death. After becoming Gu Sitong's puppet, he would probably be the one to kill Xing Wuxing. There was no need for Gu Sitong to do it himself, so it was best not to go out. "Ah!" Xing Wuxing roared, and white light suddenly burst out from his body. Then, he turned into a sun that shone with white light. He reached out and deftly caught Gu Si's attack, and directly sent Gu Sitong flying. Gu Sitong snorted angrily in the air. Good. He could tell at once that Xing Wuxing was using his secret skill. He had overdrawn his lifespan and turned it into power, and had already fallen into a berserk state. It was not appropriate for him to take advantage of the situation, so he disappeared in a flash. Chu Li's frown deepened. If Gu Sitong escaped, he would not be able to live in peace anymore. He could become a puppet at any time. This feeling was terrible. Xing Wuxing did not chase after him. He stopped where he was and retracted the white light, revealing a pale and weak face. He spat out another arrow of blood and sat on the ground weakly. Gu Sitong suddenly appeared again and hit him with his palm. Bam! Xing Wuxing looked excited and met it with his palm. Gu Sitong flew out and spat out a mouthful of blood in the air. He sneered and said, "Good plan." He was about to disappear in the air, but he realized that he could not hide in the void. Xing Wuxing took a step forward and hit him in the chest with his palm. Bam! Gu Sitong spat out another mouthful of blood in the air. Xing Wuxing tried to catch up again, but he realized that Gu Sitong's eyes were glowing and he met it with his palm. Bam! Xing Wuxing took a step back. Gu Sitong retreated even faster in the air and took out a yellow bead. Chu Li recognized it immediately. It was a void-breaching bead. It was much purer and more powerful than the one he used before. He could no longer stay out of this. Xing Wuxing could no longer be counted on, and Gu Sitong had endless treasures. If he could not take him down this time, he might not have another chance. A god-punishing thunder sword was already thrust. This god-punishing thunder sword was powerful. It was condensed from all his killing intent. Before Gu Sitong could react, he was hit. Bam! Gu Sitong flew out and spat out a mouthful of blood in the air. Good lad. He laughed softly when he fell to the ground after spitting out blood. Chu Li stood in the formation and shook his head. Gu Sitong was indeed powerful. Other than the treasure he used to protect himself, he had other treasures, one after another. Chu Li really did not know how many more treasures he had. The god-punishing thunder sword was blocked by the treasure, and its power was not even 1/10 of its original. Gu Sitong was also slightly injured, but it was not as serious as he looked. It was obvious that he was trying to lure Chu Li over. Chu Li was shocked. Gu Sitong had obviously sensed him. He took advantage of the moment when the god-punishing thunder sword was shot out. He suddenly stepped out of the formation and stood in front of Gu Sitong to protect him. His eyes stared at Xing Wuxing, who was slowly approaching. Xing Wuxing shook his head and sighed when he saw this. He knew that Chu Li had turned into a puppet and his reward had gone up in smoke. It was all for naught after all. It was better to leave. Chu Li appeared in front of him in a flash. The sword of insensibility above his head turned into a rain of swords and shrouded him. Xing Wuxing was suddenly flustered, and Gu Sitong took the opportunity to hit him with a palm. Chu Li discovered the magic of the traction skill. It was as if he had become a bystander. His body was under the control of others. He could only watch as his body protected Gu Sitong and attacked Xing Wuxing. He tried very hard to regain his body, but it was useless. He was driven by an invisible force and attacked with all his might. His speed was as fast as lightning, and he even felt that his body was even faster than before. He didn't know if it was because of the wonders of the Soul Lotus or because of the traction spell. Chapter 25:12. Yo! Xing Wuxing struggled a little against Chu Li's sword rain, but he was not in a sorry state. Chu Li did not channel the Heaven Spirit Scripture or the Life and Death Scripture. He only used the heart technique of the Sword of Insensibility, so the sword energy was extremely pure, but did not surpass the spiritual energy of this world. Its power was far less than before. If he were to use the Sword of Indifference himself, Xing Wuxing would not be so calm. Even if he was not injured, he would still have to flee. He secretly shook his head. It seemed that the distraction spell still had its limits, especially for someone like him who possessed several secret skills. Gu Sitong slapped Xing Wuxing with an excited look. He was already thinking about how to turn Xing Wuxing into a puppet. As for Chu Li, he would make him commit suicide after this. As a puppet, he was powerless to resist, as he was told to commit suicide. Although Chu Li had the body of Soul Lotus and had greater potential, he was far from Xing Wuxing. He had the martial arts of the Divine Sun Church, which was like adding wings to a tiger. After becoming a puppet, even if he could not run amok, his ability to protect himself would be stronger. He relied on upgrading the puppet step by step. First, he learned profound martial arts from the puppet. Then he let the puppet cultivate the traction skill. He only taught it the method of condensing the mother seed, so that the puppet could rely on the mother seed to pass its cultivation and skills to him. That was how he achieved his current profound cultivation level. First, he planted the child seed, then the mother seed. This was the original upgrade method he created in a flash of inspiration. With this method, when he was strong enough, it would not be a dream to revive the Divine Sun Church. Seeing Chu Li desperately using the Sword of Insensibility and forcing Xing Wuxing to retreat, but he could not do anything to Xing Wuxing, he shook his head. He could not help but sigh. He was only one step away. He first taught Chu Li the traction skill to condense the mother seed. Then he would pass the martial arts to himself. Then he would know what Chu Li had and make his body activate this martial arts. Now, he did not know Chu Li's martial arts, so he could only make him act instinctively and could not unleash the strongest power. The puppet controlled by the traction skill could only control the body, not the mind. Therefore, he could give an order to the puppet to use some martial arts to deal with others, but the prerequisites clearly stated what martial arts it was. Even if he could find out from Chu Li what kind of martial arts he knew and what kind of martial arts he was most proficient in, he would not be able to accurately perform them. The best way was to obtain his experience and realization, just like his own body. Only then would he be able to control the martial arts freely and greatly increase his power. Bam! Xing Wuxing took a step back and sneered. So what if there are two of you? As soon as he finished speaking, he turned around and left, suddenly disappearing. Gu Sitong stared coldly in the direction where he disappeared. He didn't chase after him, because even if he did, he wouldn't be able to catch up. Phew! Gu Sitong heaved a long sigh of relief, his face pale. He turned to look at Chu Li. However, Chu Li felt that his body had suddenly recovered and he could control it freely again. He hurriedly activated the heavenly demon scripture and instantly transformed into another person. He became Zhao Dai, but his appearance did not change. The heavenly demonic scripture was mysterious and far surpassed the heavenly demonic power. Once it was unleashed, it would not only change one's appearance and body, but one's thoughts would also change. One would become a completely different person. One's original consciousness would become like a guest, watching from the sidelines and allowing Zhao Dai to do whatever he wanted. Gu Sidong squinted his eyes and looked at Chu Li. Suddenly, he used the distraction skill again. Chu Li suddenly felt that he had lost control of his body. Even Zhao Dai had become a spectator. "You want to kill me?" Gu Sidong asked coldly. "Tell me the truth." He activated the distraction skill to make Chu Li tell the truth. Chu Li could only tell the truth and would never go against it. This was the overbearing nature of the distraction skill, and there was no way to break it. Chu Li shook his head and answered without hesitation, "No." He was now Zhao Dai. Zhao Dai did not know Gu Sidong at all, so he did not have any killing intent. Gu Sidong stared at Chu Li for a while and slowly nodded. "Then do you know my identity?" "I don't." Chu Li shook his head. "Not bad. That's great. I'll pass you a heart technique. Cultivate it well. With your comprehension, you'll learn it quickly." Gu Sidong smiled. "All right." Chu Li answered expressionlessly. Gu Sidong stopped using the distraction skill again and looked at Chu Li with a face full of smiles. When he met Chu Li, he always had a cold face. Although he looked kind, he made people unable to get close to him. Now that he was smiling at Chu Li, he looked so kind that people could not help but feel close to him. Chu Li used the heavenly demon scripture again and returned to his original identity. He smiled and closed fist saluted. "Senior, are you going to pass me martial arts?" "This is a secret skill that can increase your comprehension," Gu Sidong said. "Once you've mastered this skill, you'll get twice the result with half the effort when you study any martial arts. You can give it a try." "Yes, thank you, Senior." Chu Li smiled. Gu Sidong stopped smiling and scoffed. "As long as you don't blame me." Chu Li shook his head. "My life was saved by you. Without you, I would have entered reincarnation. I wouldn't have the chance to continue living, so you don't have to worry. It's good that you have such thoughts." Gu Sidong nodded in satisfaction. He suddenly extended his hand and pointed between Chu Li's eyebrows. Chu Li did not dodge and let the finger touch him. Suddenly, a strange aura entered his mind and turned into a picture scroll. Slowly, a mnemonic chant appeared. This picture scroll seemed to be imprinted in his mind and could not be forgotten. Then, the force in his body began to circulate. This was the heart technique to condense the mother seed. Chu Li suddenly changed the heart technique and used another heart technique. This time, it was the heart technique to condense the seed. He had already obtained a method to form a child seed from the Tower Master of the Heaven-Shaking Building, and he was already very familiar with it. Before, because he didn't have a mother seed, he couldn't form a child seed. Now that he had Gu Sidong's mother seed, it was easy to form a child seed. "Senior, should I pass the seed over?" Chu Li asked. "All right." Gu Sidong nodded. He was relieved that Chu Li did not want to kill him. Even so, he still used the traction skill and used it to control Chu Li to perform the traction skill to give him the mother seed. Chu Li instantly lost control of his body. He could not even change his expression as he was controlled by Gu Sidong. He then watched as the seed entered between Gu Sidong's eyebrows and entered his body. Gu Sidong let out a sigh of relief and smiled. Then, his expression changed. He realized that it was the seed that entered his body. He widened his eyes. Chu Li smiled. While he was shocked, he broke away from control and used the traction skill to control Gu Sidong. Gu Sidong was one step behind and lost control of Chu Li. The shock on his face faded under Chu Li's control, and he stared at Chu Li calmly. Chu Li smiled. "Thank you, Senior. Don't worry, I won't kill you. Now, please pass all the mother seeds to me." "All right." Gu Sidong answered stiffly and pressed his finger between Chu Li's eyebrows. Chu Li did not dodge. Instead, streams of heat flashed through his mind. One picture scroll after another unfolded in his mind. Then, waves of energy entered his body. His body's cultivation level kept increasing. Chu Li was overjoyed. The traction skill was indeed mysterious. It was like an enlightenment technique. Chapter 25:13. Gu Sidong cultivated three types of martial arts: the traction skill, the heaven raiment power, and the thunder wind palm. Although Chu Li received the inheritance and experience of these three martial arts, as if he had cultivated them for hundreds of years, he did not accept all of them. He only took the traction skill and gave up on the other two. These two kinds of martial arts were indeed powerful, but he did not cultivate them himself. Moreover, he believed that what he had learned was unique, so he could use them more easily than what he had learned from Gu Sidong. Gu Sidong was now his puppet, and their identities were reversed. The traction skill consumed a lot of spirit, so it could not be used continuously. That was why Gu Sidong stopped and gave Chu Li a chance to turn the situation around. If he stopped using the traction skill, Gu Sidong would have a chance to control him. Once the seed was planted, even the person who cast the skill could not remove it. He could only control this person and could not control others. The traction skill could only control one person. This was an iron law that could not be violated. He could not let Gu Sidong remove the seed, so Gu Sidong still had a chance to control him. When that time came, Chu Li would die without a doubt, so Gu Sidong could only die. Sigh. He sighed and shook his head. Between his life and Gu Sidong's, he had no other choice, even if Gu Sidong saved his life. I'll destroy my martial arts. Chu Li sighed. In the end, he decided to leave a chance. No matter what Gu Sidong's purpose was, he saved his life. If he killed him, it would leave a flaw in his heart, and it would be troublesome for him to cultivate in the future. Bam, 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 bam. Gu Sidong slapped his body several times. Then, his body was like a deflated balloon, slowly shriveling. Chu Li could vaguely hear the hissing sound of his breath. His cultivation was quickly dissipating. Chu Li could not help but sigh in relief, but he did not hurry to remove the traction skill. The longer the traction skill was used, the more spirit it consumed. In the end, the consumption would double, but Chu Li could bear it. The omniscient mirror had already observed the void of Gu Sidong's mind. Gu Sidong's mind was calm. He thought of nothing, only calmness. Chu Li was shocked, but he soon realized that the distraction skill could not only manipulate his body, but also his spirit. However, the distraction skill could not manipulate his own spirit, which was obviously due to the numerous mystical skills in the void of his mind. Unfortunately, no matter how powerful his mystical skill was, he still couldn't completely resist the lure technique. He could only guard the void of his mind, so when he was controlled, he couldn't unleash his full power. Chu Li shook his head emotionally and then removed the distraction skill. Gu Sidong's spirit was suddenly lifted. His eyes suddenly brightened and then dimmed, revealing a bitter smile. Chu Li did not want to say anything more. He stood up and said, "I'll spare your life. Take care." With that, he stepped into the void and disappeared without a trace. Gu Sidong looked in the direction where Chu Li had disappeared. His face was gloomy and his eyes were staring at Chu Li. The hatred in his eyes was almost tangible. Unfortunately, no matter how resentful his eyes were, it was useless. Chu Li had already disappeared. After a long time, Gu Sidong sighed and shook his head. Then he got up and staggered back. He insisted on walking back to the ravine and then moved a stone. Suddenly, the entire ravine began to shake. The terrain began to change. The mountains next to it seemed to be moving and finally formed a cylindrical shape surrounding the ravine in the middle. There was no way out. Then he sat next to the pool. Half an hour had passed. At this time, his face was full of wrinkles and his hair was white like snow. It was as if he had changed into a different person. He looked up at the sky and saw the white clouds floating in the blue sky. He allowed a long sigh, and then his head suddenly drooped. His breath stopped, and his vitality disappeared. He was dead. He was alive because of his strong cultivation. Once his cultivation disappeared, his lifespan suddenly shortened. He had exceeded the limit of his lifespan and was about to die. Fortunately, he had a treasure to protect his body, so he could hold on until now. He could not let his body be taken away by others. He could not let his body be taken away to receive a handsome reward, and his bones would be turned into ashes. If he wanted to protect himself, this ravine was the best place to bury his bones. Chu Li was heading north in the flying rock mountains when he suddenly stopped. He sensed something in his mind. The seed that he had planted had dissipated, and the seed in his body had also dissipated. He immediately understood that Gu Sidong had died. He let out a sigh of relief, as if a heavy burden had been lifted off his shoulders. This time, he did not need to worry about his rationality and emotions. He was completely at peace, but he knew the cause of Gu Sidong's death. He could only blame Gu Sidong's fate for not extending his life with a treasure. Chu Li had given him a chance to live. If he had a treasure that could extend his life, he could still live. If not, he could only die. Chu Li could not blame him. Xing Wuxing suddenly appeared. After looking around, he floated forward and arrived at the ravine. However, he found that the ravine had changed. He could not enter it, even if he used a formation-breaking talisman. He knew that this was a dangerous place. The aura of death had accumulated, and it would become thicker and thicker. It would form the best place for a grave. Living people could not enter, or they would be cursed. It would be useless even if they had profound martial art skills. He slapped the ancient tree beside him. The handsome reward that was in his hands was gone. It made him extremely angry. Disappointment and joy boiled in his heart. He wanted to scream at the sky. He clenched his teeth as he thought of Chu Li. Hence, he focused his attention and tried to sense Chu Li. Previously, he had already flicked the strange fragrance on Chu Li's body. Only by circulating the strange heart technique could he sense this strange fragrance. There was no smell. His face slowly turned serious. He frowned and thought about it. In the end, he shook his head and stepped into the void, disappearing. He could not sense the strange fragrance. It was obviously broken, or Chu Li had already died in this dangerous place. That was why he could not sense it. It was such a pity for Chu Li. He shook his head when he thought about it and put the matter aside. Chu Li came out of the flying rock mountains in the evening when the sun was setting. In front of him was a towering giant city. It was like a giant beast crouching. It exuded a murderous aura, which made Chu Li shudder. As soon as he came out of the mountain, 12 armored warriors had already surrounded him. They did not allow him to separate and attacked with their blades. The long blade turned into a cold light. The blade could not be seen clearly. The 12 cold lights pressed against him, not giving him a chance to dodge. Chu Li snorted, and the sword of indifference shot out like a storm. Ding, 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 ding. The sword energy of the sword of indifference was like a solid substance. When it hit the blade, it suddenly revealed the blade. The blade was about 1 foot wide and 2 meters long. It was taller than them and looked heavy. However, in their hands, it was like holding a piece of wood. It was light and agile. It was so fast that it blocked the sword energy of the sword of indifference one by one. Chu Li's cultivation level had skyrocketed. It was no different from Gu Sidong's cultivation level. He was far from the past. The power of the sword of indifference had also increased. The 12 armored warriors could not breathe. They retreated step by step. The originally closed circle was getting bigger and bigger. Chapter 25:14. Under the shiny armors and inside the helmets were the faces of young men. They looked about the same age as him, but they had long lifespans. Chu Li estimated that they were around 199 years old. To them, who had 10,000 years of lifespan, they were indeed young and had just reached adulthood. Their cultivation level was already very shocking. If Chu Li's cultivation level had not skyrocketed, he would not have been able to take on the 12 of them. However, it was the complete opposite now. They were so overwhelmed that they could not breathe. They kept retreating and were about to collapse. It was only because Chu Li was merciful that they were not injured. As Chu Li fought with the 12 armored warriors, he used his clairvoyance to observe the huge city on the other side. He saw 12 warriors dressed in shining armor flying out of the city. Their bodies emanated a murderous aura, and they looked like 12 iron men, majestic and imposing. Their light body technique was very high. They jumped down from the top of the city and stepped on the void as if they were walking on flat ground. They moved in a straight line and arrived in front of them in the blink of an eye. They gently patted the scabbards on their backs, and the long blades were unsheathed and landed in their hands. These long blades were taller than them, so they had to carry the long blades on their backs. They could not even pull the long blades out with their hands. They had to use their strength to shake the long blades out. Their movements were cool and fast to attract attention. However, such cool movements contained a murderous intent. When the blades were swung, a faint arc of light appeared in the void and instantly fell on Chu Li. Bang, 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 bang. Chu Li's body flashed. The sword energy of the Sword of Indifference blocked the blade energy. Then, the sword energy of the Sword of Indifference counterattacked and instantly enveloped them like a storm. At the same time, the sword energy was mixed with the aura of the heavenly spirit scripture and turned into a pure sword energy. They could not guard against it and did not dare to be careless. They had to give their all for each sword energy, and soon they felt tired. Chu Li's sword energy seemed endless. It was denser and denser than a storm. They had no time to care about anything else and could only try their best to resist. If they were distracted for even a moment, the sword energy would hit them. Bang, 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 bang. Chu Li's sword energy became denser and denser. He could feel the power of the soul lotus. It could actually nourish the soul, and the consumption of spiritual energy was unusually low. Unfortunately, there was only one drawback. The soul was trapped and could not return to the outland. Formation! A shout was heard. 24 armored warriors suddenly flew up and took up positions in the sky. Then, they floated toward Chu Li and surrounded him. Ding, 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 ding. The clear ringing sound was continuous and rapid, like rain hitting a banana leaf. The blade chi formed a huge capstan, trapping Chu Li within. The blade chi spun faster and faster, as if it wanted to grind him to pieces. Chu Li's sword chi kept blocking, but he couldn't stop it. His shield of vigor was constantly hit by the saber aura, but because the heavenly spirit scripture was extremely pure, even when the saber aura came close to his body, it could not break through the shield of vigor. The sound it made was the sound of metal colliding. His eyes suddenly flashed with a deep blue brilliance. Bang, 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 bang. Several people were sent flying, and the array formation was immediately broken. The thing that Chu Li was least afraid of now was formations. He could control an area of 1 mile around him and render any formation ineffective. Moreover, the formation of these 24 people was not exactly exquisite. It was just a rough formation, with the power of the 24 people stacked on top of each other. Chu Li continued to use the god-slaying thundersword. Bang, bang, bang. More and more people were sent flying. When they landed on the ground, they were dispirited and dispirited, unable to fight anymore. After a while, all 24 people had fallen, and Chu Li was the only one left standing. He frowned at one of the armored people and scoffed. Ridiculous. That person pulled off his helmet, revealing a resolute middle-aged face. There was an awe-inspiring righteousness between his brows, and no one dared to underestimate him. He said in a deep voice, "This is the territory of the king of southern Jinan. People from the southern border are forbidden from entering. I am the guard sergeant Mo Zhengyi of the king of southern Jinan." Chu Li said, "I am Chu Li, a disciple of the Grand Supreme Peak." "You're a disciple of the Grand Supreme Peak?" Mo Zhengyi scoffed. Chu Li nodded slowly. "Now that the Grand Supreme Peak is in a bad situation, would I pretend to be one?" Mo Zhengyi frowned and scoffed. "You must have rushed back after hearing the news from the Grand Supreme Peak?" Chu Li said slowly, "I heard that someone was attacking the Grand Supreme Peak, so I came to help." "You're originally from the southern border, right?" Mo Zhengyi asked. Chu Li said, "That's right. This cannot be hidden from others." Gu Sidong was from the southern border, but he had never been to the northern border. He had thought of escaping to the northern border, but the northern border's pursuit of the distraction technique was even more ferocious, and there were too many martial arts masters in the northern border. Chu Li's experience was in the southern border. He knew nothing about the northern border, so he admitted it calmly. Otherwise, he could have easily seen through him. Although this Mo Zhengyi was sent flying by the god-punishing thunder sword, his spiritual power was strong enough to block Chu Li's prying. Mo Zhengyi shook his head. You're too late. The Grand Supreme Peak is no longer here, and no one knows who destroyed the Grand Supreme Peak. You won't be able to find anyone for revenge. Chu Li gritted his teeth and sneered. Then I'm back to find the culprit. If they can destroy the Grand Supreme Peak, do you think a mere disciple of the Grand Supreme Peak can take revenge? Mo Zhengyi shook his head. Now that the rare disciples of the Grand Supreme Peak have all been killed by them, you're going to be hunted down soon. It's best if you go back. Chu Li smiled. Mo Zhengyi scoffed. It's rare for people from the southern border to come to the northern border alive. Even if your martial arts are good, you'll end up the same. It's not too late to turn back now. Chu Li said, I've made up my mind. I'm going to the Grand Supreme Peak. You're courting death. Mo Zhengyi frowned and sneered. He cast a sidelong glance at him. Do you think you're stronger than the elders of the Grand Supreme Peak? You're probably a disciple that the disciples of the Grand Supreme Peak accepted by chance when they traveled to the southern border, right? Chu Li remained silent. Mo Zhengyi said, forget it. If you want to live or die, no one can stop you. Do you really want to enter the northern border? Yes. Chu Li nodded slowly. Good. You're qualified to enter the city since you're able to resist our joint attack. Mo Zhengyi said, let's go enter the city. He glanced at the rest of the people. They struggled to stand up, but they did not look at Chu Li with malicious eyes. Instead, they looked at him with admiration. No wonder he dared to come from the southern border. He really had amazing skills. He was able to resist the siege of 24 people and was qualified to enter the city. Chu Li asked, does everyone who enters the northern border have to do this? Mo Zhengyi scoffed. This is the kindness of our Royal Highness. Those who can't pass through our blade formation should return to the southern border as soon as possible. They'll die if they enter the northern border. Chu Li said, thank you very much. He did not feel the killing intent from Mo Zhengyi and the others. He only felt their killing intent. Every one of them had taken human lives and killed many people. It was obvious that this Royal Highness was not a kind person. Mo Zhengyi said, once you pass through the Imperial Residence's jurisdiction, you'll know how kind His Royal Highness is. You're lucky that you came in from here. If you went anywhere else, you'd be dead. He strode back without using his light body technique. Soon, he arrived at the city. Chu Li immediately felt the murderous aura and prosperity rushing towards him. Chapter 25:15. The omniscient mirror was very different from experiencing it personally. Under the observation of the omniscient mirror, he could see every corner clearly. He could look down like an eagle and see palm lines clearly. However, he could feel a unique aura when he approached it personally. It was a mark left behind by time. Mo Zhengyi waved his hand. The 12 armored warriors who followed him stepped back and dispersed, leaving only Mo Zhengyi by his side. Chu Li glanced at the armored warriors and continued to head east with Mo Zhengyi. Mo Zhengyi said, this is your first time in the northern region, right? Chu Li nodded. Mo Zhengyi turned to look at him and shook his head. He continued to walk forward. Be careful. The customs in the northern region are different from the southern region. The strong are respected too. Chu Li said, I heard that the northern region is filled with endless battles. You're right. Mo Zhengyi nodded. Chu Li frowned. It's still the same. Nothing has changed? No. Mo Zhengyi scoffed. No one is willing to submit to the other. Let's fight. We're used to it. You won't be surprised soon. From the moment you step into the northern region, it means that you'll be fighting all the time. Chu Li nodded slowly. Mo Zhengyi said, let's go see His Royal Highness and see what his arrangements are. Chu Li frowned. What do you mean? I want to go to Taishang Peak. Why do I have to see His Royal Highness? He knew that His Royal Highness was the southern garrison prince, but he did not even know where he came from. Mo Zhengyi said, you don't know where His Royal Highness came from? Chu Li shook his head. Mo Zhengyi smiled. His Royal Highness's surname is Tang Yun. It's not because he's part of the royal family, but because of his accumulated military achievements. There are only 9 princes in the Dali dynasty and 4 gods of war. His Royal Highness is one of them. Chu Li asked, "Can he be the emperor?" Although he had never been to the northern region, he knew some basics. The Dali dynasty was the southernmost imperial court in the northern region. There were 3 countries in the northern region. Dali was one of them, but it was the weakest among them. Mo Zhengyi's face darkened. He glared at Chu Li fiercely. Seeing Chu Li's calm face, he scoffed and shook his head. Of course not. His Royal Highness doesn't have such thoughts. Chu Li nodded. He's already a Royal Highness and is only 1 step away from the throne. His Royal Highness is loyal to Dali. No matter which prince sits on the throne, His Royal Highness will continue to protect him. Mo Zhengyi said in a deep voice, "It's a pity that there are many misunderstandings in the world. They always use the most malicious thoughts to try to figure out your highness." The 2 of them talked as they walked eastward along a main road. The people around them were majestic and rough. They walked with large strides and haggled, as if they were quarreling. It seemed like a fight was about to break out. Chu Li shook his head and sighed. The people here were indeed rough and fierce, but they seemed to be trying their best to restrain themselves in the town. It was obvious that they were deterred by the king of Jinan and did not dare to act recklessly. King, and Wang, and Royal, Yin Royal. The 6 steps were paved with white jade and shone with a warm luster under the sunlight. 12 armored guards stood on the steps, and there were 2 guards standing on each step. Their hands were on their long sabers, and they looked like 12 statues. Mo Zhengyi went up the stairs, and the 12 guards nodded. Chu Li followed him and entered the golden door. They went around a painted wall and came to the main hall. He saw a middle-aged man pacing with his hands behind his back. This middle-aged man wore a bright yellow gown, and his figure was tall and sturdy. His face was like a crown of jade, and his eyes were like cold stars that flickered with coldness. The 2 strokes of black mustache above his lips made his face seem even more fair and gentle. "Your Royal Highness." Mo Zhengyi closed fists saluted. "Young Mo, you came at the right time." King of Southern Kingdom Tang Yun waved. "I was about to call you over." Mo Zhengyi smiled. "Your Royal Highness, this is Chu Li, a disciple of Mount Taishan. He just came from the southern border to investigate the murderer of Mount Taishan. He's here to see you." He gave Tang Yun a look, then said to Chu Li, "His Royal Highness is thirsty for talents. If you stay and help His Royal Highness, you'll be able to avoid being hunted down and cultivate in peace. You'll be able to improve your strength and wait for your revenge." Chu Li frowned and slowly shook his head. "I want to investigate the murderer of Mount Taishan. It's impossible for me to stay here." His key was to find Shao Qi. He had a bad feeling that he could not sense Shao Qi when he was here. Logically, without the obstruction of Flying Rock Mountain, they should be able to sense each other. However, he was at a loss and had no clue. King of Southern Kingdom Tang Yun frowned. "Mr. Chu, do you really want to find the murderer of Mount Taishan?" "Yes." Chu Li nodded slowly but firmly. Tang Yun waved his hand. "You don't have to think about it. You don't have to look for them. They will come to you." Chu Li said, "That's great. With your martial arts, it's almost impossible to escape their assassination. Otherwise, Mount Taishan would not have been destroyed." Mo Zhengyi scoffed. Chu Li smiled and did not say anything. "Although your martial arts are good, it's not invincible. You can't stop them." Mo Zhengyi shook his head. Tang Yun said, "Mr. Chu, why don't you stay here and improve your strength?" He knew Mo Zhengyi very well. Mo Zhengyi was upright and magnanimous. He would never exaggerate. Since he said that his martial arts were not bad, then he must be extraordinarily powerful. He suddenly looked at Chu Li in a different light. He did not feel that Chu Li was powerful, but Mo Zhengyi valued him so much. He must have hidden his strength. Mo Zhengyi said, "If you can make a contribution, His Royal Highness will reward you. He can also give you some subordinates to help you take revenge. It's impossible for you to fight alone." Chu Li said, "Thank you for your kindness, Brother Mo, but I can't wait to see Mount Taishan. Mount Taishan is now desolate. It's in ruins, and there's nothing else. Emojing shook his head. You'll be wasting your time. Don't think that I'm just scaring you. The people who are after you must be on their way. Chuli said slowly, I have to see it. Forget it. Emojing had already seen through Chu Li's temper. He was a man of his word. There was no way to persuade him. He scoffed. If you really can't stop them, you could just teleport back, he said as he took out an iron tag. It was dark, but it emitted a faint luster. He scoffed. Hold this. It can break through all obstacles and teleport you here. Take it. Chuli reached out to take it, and closed fists saluted. Emojing and the other 24 people wanted to kill him. It could be true, or it could be a test. Only those who passed the test will be qualified to meet the Prince of Jinnan and be recruited. If they could not pass the test, they would be forced to return to the southern border. Emojing was indeed fair and selfless. He was worthy of respect. Emojing showed a satisfied smile. He was really afraid that Chuli would be arrogant and refuse to accept it. He closed fists saluted. Your Royal Highness? The Prince of Jinnan, Tang Yun nodded. Then I won't be the bad guy. Mr. Chu, you can go. Just keep your life. Thank you, Your Royal Highness. Chuli closed fists saluted. Tang Yun said, I welcome Mr. Chu to come back at any time. You could be the guest of our imperial residence. You don't have to worry about the mundane affairs. Just focus on cultivation. Our imperial residence has a sutra library and many pills. Chuli nodded slowly and closed fists saluted. Goodbye. Emojing scoffed. Be careful. If you see something is wrong, come back quickly. They won't dare to chase you. Chuli nodded. He then flew out of the imperial residence of the Prince of Jinnan and headed north. He knew that Emojing knew about Mount Taishang. As long as he led the way, he could go there in an instant. However, he did not ask for Emojing's help. He decided to find someone else to kill his people. Chapter 25:16. As he was running, there was a sudden fluctuation behind him. It was Emojing. He stopped in his tracks and turned his head to look. Emojing stepped in front of him. The armor on his body had already been removed. His green robe fluttered in the wind, and he had a strong aura. Master Chu, let me give you a ride. Emojing said, I'll send you directly to the vicinity of Taishang Peak, so you don't have to waste time. Thank you. Chuli thought for a while and did not refuse. He did not want to trouble Emojing, but he would not reject Emojing's offer of help. Emojing smiled. This meant that Chu Li had accepted his favor. By accepting this favor, it meant that Chu Li was close to him and not hostile. Emojing reached out and placed his hand on Chu Li's shoulder. Chu Li allowed him to do as he pleased, and the two of them disappeared. The next moment, they reappeared on top of a towering peak. The surroundings were lush as if it was midsummer, but it was currently winter. Taishang Peak is 100 miles away. I'll send you there. Emojing said, be careful. Don't underestimate your enemies. Taishang Peak is a dangerous place now. Someone might be waiting for the disciples of Taishang Peak to die. Chuli nodded slowly. I understand. Emojing saw that he had made up his mind and sighed. He could not bear to see such a master die in vain. However, it was because of Chu Li's actions that it showed his character and that he was worth roping in. If he retreated out of fear, disregarded his master's kindness, and gave up his vengeance, then no matter how powerful his martial arts was, it would not be good to rope him in. This was indeed a contradiction. He was in a dilemma. Fortunately, he had already given away the teleportation tag to save his life. If he still died, then that would be his fate. Chuli fists saluted and turned to head north. He had already seen the location of Taishang Peak and the 3 huge words on a precipice. The 3 words were filled with sword energy and looked down on all living beings. From these 3 words, Chuli could feel the spirit of the founder of the sect. He really looked down on everyone else and thought that he was the only one in the world. The blue seas turned into mulberry fields. Back then, they were arrogant, but now their sect was destroyed. There was nothing in the world that was eternal and unchanging. Prosperity and decline were inevitable. His omniscient mirror had been observing the Great Elder Peak from top to bottom. The Great Elder Peak was no longer protected by the formation. It was in a complete mess and was in ruins. Chu kept sinking. Based on the lingering murderous intent, he knew that it was a battle to the death. Since Shao-Chi was already at the peak, it was inevitable that she would fight to the death. Now that he couldn't sense her existence, the outcome was obvious. Although he was lucky, it was impossible for everything in the world to be the luckiest. All disasters were unrelated to him, and he couldn't avoid even the 3 calamities and 7 disasters. Was he going to lose the love of his life now? He also saw some experts on the Taishang Peak hiding in the dark. Some were in caves, some were at the bottom of cliffs, and some were in the forest. All of them had profound cultivation and were not inferior to experts like Xing Wuxing. Obviously, they were prepared to kill the remaining disciples of the Taishang Peak and wait for them to fall into the trap. Chu frowned. His cultivation level was high now, so he was not afraid of these masters. However, once he got entangled with these people, he was afraid that there would be an endless stream of trouble. The most important thing was Shao-Chi. He just wanted to find her. He suddenly frowned when he saw a middle-aged man gliding up to the top of the Taishang Peak. In just a short while, he arrived at the peak. This middle-aged man had a profound cultivation level and was not inferior to Xing Wuxing. He was also a rare master, but compared to the masters lying in ambush on the Taishang Peak, he was not much different. Chu looked at the middle-aged man's temperament and aura and felt that they were not from the same group. It was very likely that he was a master of the Taishang Peak. Chu found it hard to believe. Was there really such a stupid person? As a disciple of the Taishang Peak, he returned to the Taishang Peak at this time. Looking at the middle-aged man's thin figure and gloomy face, he looked very shrewd. He really did not look like a hot-blooded person, so Chu dared not confirm his guess. Huh! With a shout, 2 middle-aged men drilled out of the cave and landed beside the gloomy-faced middle-aged man one after the other. The gloomy middle-aged man frowned and looked at him. Then, he tilted his body to look at the people behind him and said coldly, "Who are you, daring to trespass on the Taishang Peak?" The sinners of the Taishang Peak still have the guts to come back. I'm impressed. I'd like to see where you villains came from. The gloomy middle-aged man sneered. The Taishang Peak isn't something you can destroy just because you want to. We've already been destroyed. As long as a disciple of the Taishang Peak doesn't die, the Taishang Peak will still exist. That's great. We'll kill all the disciples of the Taishang Peak. How arrogant. There aren't many disciples left now. We'll get the list of disciples and kill them one by one. Impossible. You won't be able to get it. Who asked us to have an insider? I forgot to tell you, Song Ji is one of us. Who the hell are you people? There's no harm in telling you. You're going to die anyway. Being a ghost who knows the truth is also a little bit of kindness. Thank you very much. Listen up, we're from the Auspicious Sect. Auspicious Sect? The gloomy middle-aged man's expression changed. You're disciples of the Auspicious Sect? What, now you're afraid? Your Auspicious Sect isn't our Dolly sect. How dare you come here? The gloomy middle-aged man gritted his teeth. Aren't you afraid of our Dolly martial arts world ganging up on you? What a joke. How can it be a sect in the martial arts world? Arrogant to this extent, your Auspicious Sect won't have a good ending. You don't have to worry about that. You already know what you want to know. It's time to be on your way. Do it. The 2 of them lightly slapped down with their palms. Their movements were gentle and elegant, as if they were dancing. There wasn't a trace of militaristic aura. It was soft and leisurely. The gloomy middle-aged man's expression suddenly became cheerful. A smile even hung on his lips. He didn't care about the 2 palms that were lightly flying over. Chu frowned and snorted. He knew that the 2's palm technique contained spiritual energy and emitted a powerful illusion. His snort immediately woke the gloomy middle-aged man up. Noticing that the 2 palms were right in front of him, the gloomy middle-aged man used all his strength to dodge them. The invisible sword energy above his head split into 2 and shot toward the 2 of them. Chu shook his head. This gloomy middle-aged man was indeed not good at scheming. He only had this frightening appearance. but his mind was very straightforward. This was clearly an excellent opportunity. If he had waited until the two palms were about to reach him and suddenly dodged, he would only need to avoid being hit in his vitals. At the same time, he would have shot out two swords at the two auspicious sect disciples while they were happy and relieved. However, he dodged in advance, giving the two of them time to prepare and raise their guard. It was a pity that the regal divine sword couldn't hit them. Li shook his head. Seeing the gloomy middle-aged man smile again under the joint attack of the two, he shook his head helplessly and snorted again. Chapter 25:17. The gloomy middle-aged man was shocked by Chu Li's voice and immediately sobered up. Seeing that the four palms were about to reach him, he gritted his teeth. This time, he had learned his lesson and pretended to be confused. Just as the palms were about to reach him, he suddenly shrunk his body and slid down as if his bones were removed. His sudden and swift movement caused the two to be unable to react in time. Bang! The four palms collided. Both of them were stunned. The two palms collided, but it was a head-on collision, resulting in a loud explosion. Both of their inner energies were extremely and extremely soft, able to kill without a trace. However, once the same palm energy collided, it would produce an extremely hard and extremely yang reaction. Therefore, when their palm energy collided with other people, it was silent and traceless. But when it collided with someone from the same sect, it was like thunder. When the two palms collided, their movements stiffened. Bang! The gloomy middle-aged man slapped both of their chests. His movements were extremely fast, and his palm energy was vigorous. Although it was not as sharp as his sword technique, he still took the opportunity to injure the two. The two auspicious sect disciples flew backward and spat out a mist of blood in the air. The palm energy of the gloomy middle-aged man was dissolved, but it did not dissipate completely. While their bodies were stiff, they were unprepared for the palm attack and suffered serious injuries. Chu Li nodded his head in satisfaction and admired the gloomy middle-aged man's move. If it was him, he would only be able to do this. It was really rare. To say that he was not scheming, he was reckless and had some quick wits, but to say that he was smart, he was muddle-headed. I'll kill you first. The gloomy middle-aged man sneered, and a sword energy hit the middle-aged man who had spoken to him earlier. Bang, 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 bang. Several sword energies hit the middle-aged man continuously, forcing him to spit out blood. The other middle-aged man was also struggling to deal with the continuous sword energy. The sword energy was even sharper than the gloomy middle-aged man's, suppressing him to the point where he could not breathe and felt that he could not hold on any longer. The sword energy chasing after him was released by Chu Li. It was endless like a violent storm, far surpassing the gloomy middle-aged man. However, he had no time to care about anything else and did not know how much pressure his companions were under. His heart shivered. No wonder this guy dared to charge up to Taishang Peak by himself. He indeed had astonishing skills. No one would be able to withstand such world-shaking sword chi. He was truly invincible. PFFF, 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 PFFF. His body suddenly flashed with a dark green brilliance and shook violently. Countless forces collided with the dark green brilliance, and the dark green brilliance quickly dissipated like a candle in the wind. Bang, 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 bang. Amidst the continuous muffled sounds, he kept trembling as if he was being hit by a hammer. He spat out a mouthful of blood and fell to the ground. He could not move and could not get up. He could only stare helplessly at the gloomy middle-aged man. He faintly felt that this was not the gloomy middle-aged man's palm strength. Chu Li nodded in satisfaction. He had gotten rid of a guy without anyone noticing, and the key was that he had not been discovered. Bang! The other middle-aged man saw that his companion was injured and had no strength to get up. He was shocked and distracted, allowing the gloomy middle-aged man to take advantage of it. Bang, 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 bang. Several sword energies landed on his body. The dark green brilliance flashed and enveloped his entire body before being destroyed. He felt the sudden increase in sword energy and instantly widened his eyes. He said hatefully, "What a hidden sword energy!" The middle-aged man was shocked, but his expression did not change. He scoffed. "Auspicious sect, since you want me to die, I will return the favor. I am Shi Jun, an Inner Peak disciple of Taishang Peak." Inner Peak disciple. The middle-aged man gritted his teeth and scoffed. No wonder. Inner Peak disciples were the core disciples of Taishang Peak. They were the future pillars of the sect. Every Inner Peak disciple had the chance to become an elder or peak leader. Shi Jun said coldly, "How many more auspicious sect disciples are there on the peak? You think I will say?" The middle-aged man on the ground chuckled. "But there's no harm in telling you. There are a total of 23 of us on Taishang Peak. You can't escape. How many Taishang Peak disciples do you have left?" Shi Jun asked coldly. "Not many." The middle-aged man chuckled. "Some were killed by us on Taishang Peak, and some are like you, throwing yourself into the net." "How foolish. Don't you think it's funny?" "You think it's funny, but we take it for granted." Shi Jun snorted. "If your auspicious sect is attacked, will you just stand by and do nothing? Of course we will take revenge, but we won't be as foolish as you, running back into the net. It's good to take the opportunity to kill more enemies." "Foolish. Impossibly foolish." The middle-aged man sneered. Shi Jun shook his head. "It's useless even if I tell you. You only need to know that as long as there is a disciple of Taishang Peak will not be destroyed and will rise again. Then we will kill all your disciples." "Impossible. There are only 12 disciples left. Now that you are one less, there are only 11 left." "Who else?" Shi Jun snorted. The middle-aged man sneered, but did not say anything. Shi Jun stretched out his hand to kill him, but just as he raised his hand, 4 middle-aged men appeared behind him and rushed forward without a word. Their palms were gentle and their movements were elegant, as if they were dancing. Shi Jun did not dare to underestimate their palm technique. He quickly bit his tongue, not wanting to be bewitched, but as he used the palm technique, he could not hold on any longer and unconsciously fell into a trance. Chu Li's soft snort rang in his ears. Shi Jun instantly sobered up, but he pretended to be in a trance and smiled foolishly. Facing the 8 palms, he did not dodge at all. When they reached his body, he suddenly disappeared and appeared behind a tall and sturdy middle-aged man, slapping down with his palm. The middle-aged man twisted his body and slapped down. His movements were still elegant, seemingly slow but strangely fast, meeting Shi Jun's palms head-on. Pop! A clear sound like a rubber ball being broken rang out. Both of them took 2 steps back. Their cultivation levels were about the same. "Kill him." The 4 men suddenly became spirited and attacked at the same time. Just as Shi Jun was in a trance, he heard another soft snort and immediately woke up. He turned around and walked away, crossing 100 meters in 1 step. It looked like he was about to rush down the mountain, causing the 4 middle-aged men to quickly move in front of him. He took advantage of the moment they came out of the void to attack one of them with his sword energy. Bang, 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 bang. Continuous sounds of collision could be heard. Shi Jun and the 4 men were in a mess. Chu Li appeared next to the 2 middle-aged men who had collapsed earlier. Without a sound, he picked them up and disappeared without a trace. When the other 4 men looked over, their eyes widened. They looked around, but did not see any trace of the 2 men. Chu Li carried the 2 men and appeared in the cave. He gently put them down and said calmly, "I want to ask you about something." "Who are you?" The middle-aged man who had been talking to Shi Jun earlier said coldly. "Do you know who we are? Why did you kidnap us here?" Chu Li looked at the 2 men calmly and said gently, "Who are the remaining 10 disciples of highest peak? Tell me." "Impossible," the middle-aged man said coldly. Chu Li smiled. "Looks like you won't give up until you see the coffin." Chapter 25:18. Chu Li flexed his fingers and released 10 finger energies. The 2 middle-aged men trembled and their bodies became stiff. Their faces were still cold and their eyes were filled with mockery. "Play and watch if you like." Chuli smiled. Do you think I'll torture you? The two men opened their mouths, but realized that they could not make a sound. They frowned and could not figure out what Chuli was thinking. If he really wanted to torture them, why did he seal their mouths? Was he afraid of disturbing the other side? However, they did not hear any other sounds. They were obviously far away from there and should not be afraid of any sound. In short, this guy was a little strange. They were inexplicably scared, but they stared at Chu Li without showing any weakness. Chu Li sighed. Is Xiao Qi's name on your list of 10? He used the omniscient mirror to observe the two men's minds. When he saw what they saw, he was overjoyed and looked at them with a smile. The two men were even more scared and stared at him coldly. Chu Li looked up at the sky and fist saluted. Thank God. At this moment, he was truly grateful to the heavens for their favor and luck. Xiao Qi's chances of escaping were too slim. Not to mention that she had just ascended and her cultivation level had just recovered. Her cultivation level was not strong and could only be considered average among the disciples of Taishang Peak. She was unique in his eyes, but not in the eyes of others. In such a sect-destroying war, the chances of her dying were too high. Moreover, he was not here and could not set up the 9-tripod cauldron suppression. If Xiao Qi really died, he could not do anything now. He could not recall her soul or resurrect her. She might have already entered reincarnation, or her soul might even be scattered. Every time he thought of this, he shuddered and did not dare to continue thinking about it. In the end, he saw Xiao Qi's name in their minds. She was on the list of 10 wanted people. Obviously, she was not dead and was still being hunted. Did you find Xiao Qi? Chu Li stared at the two men without blinking. The two men widened their eyes and finally understood Chu Li's goal. Chu Li smiled. In their minds, Xiao Qi was still on the run. They could not catch up to her, so she was still safe. No wonder he could not sense her. She must have used some kind of treasure to isolate all senses. He couldn't sense her even though he had such a close connection with her, let alone the traitor of Taishang Peak. That was why Xiao Qi was able to survive until now. He suddenly frowned and tapped twice with his fingers. The two of them let out a long breath and were able to make sound. You don't have to think about getting lucky. These 10 people won't be able to escape. The more muscular middle-aged man sneered and said, He's just a fish that slipped through the net. There's always a way to catch him. Chu Li took a closer look, and his expression changed slightly. The Lucky Luck sect really had a way to chase after Xiao Qi. They had a unique secret skill, but the requirement for the caster was extremely high. Only 2 people from the Lucky Luck sect had successfully cultivated it, and they could only use this secret skill once a day. This was the soul tracking secret art. It could directly track the person's location through the 8 characters of birth. There was absolutely no chance of survival. Due to the high price of this skill, it was rarely practiced. Even if it was mastered, it was rarely used as the price was one's lifespan. There were many ways to chase after a person, but this secret skill would not be used unless it was a last resort. He thought about it and gave up on the idea of killing the 2 men. Such people must be heavily protected by the Lucky Luck sect. Without any opportunity, it would be difficult for him to find them. Moreover, they were experts in tracking, so how could they not be prepared? The 2 middle-aged men looked at each other and suddenly realized something. They had vaguely guessed Chu Li's ability to see through their thoughts. Chu Li pondered and said, Why does the Lucky Luck sect want to destroy Taishang Peak? There must be a great benefit. The 2 men gritted their teeth and remained silent. Chu Li slowly nodded and said, I see. He had already seen through their minds why Taishang Peak was destroyed. It was because there was a unique flower in Taishang Peak called the Lucky Flower. It was a spirit medicine used to cultivate the Lucky sect's martial arts. Consuming the Lucky Flower, or even cultivating in the Lucky Flower thicket, would allow the Lucky sect's martial arts to advance by leaps and bounds. The Lucky sect guarding martial arts was the Lucky Divine Technique, a divine technique that could kill people without leaving a trace. An ordinary man's wealth arouses his own ruin. This was something that could not be helped. It was impossible for Taishang Peak to give their peak to Lucky Luck sect, and Lucky Luck sect did not want to pay a high price to obtain the Lucky Flower. It was a pity that the lucky flower could not grow anywhere else, so they had to obtain Taishang Peak. Chu Li thought about it, and suddenly sat down. With a sweep of his fingers, the two men's mute acupoints were sealed again. His thumb touched the sturdy middle-aged man's forehead. The sturdy middle-aged man could not move and could only watch helplessly as Chu Li's thumb touched his forehead before he fainted. When he woke up, he found that all the acupoints in his body had been unsealed. His inner energy was flowing smoothly, and he was circulating a heart technique that he had never seen before. This heart technique was advancing by leaps and bounds. Then, his cultivation level and comprehension condensed into a seed. Without any hesitation, he reached out and tapped Chu Li's forehead, sending the seed into Chu Li's forehead. He weakly lay on the ground, his body extremely weak, as if he was seriously ill. It was as if his cultivation had left him. Chu Li nodded in satisfaction. With a light touch, the sturdy middle-aged man died. From their minds, he knew that their hands were stained with the blood of Taishang Peak's disciples. Not only did they kill Taishang Peak's disciples, but they also killed women and children without hesitation. He had already obtained all the cultivation, heart techniques, and comprehension of the sturdy middle-aged man. Lucky divine power was indeed mysterious. It could control people invisibly and directly affect their minds. It was a kind of utilization of mental energy and was impossible to guard against. One of the wonders of the Soul Lotus body was that there was no limit to one's body, and one's cultivation could continuously increase without a limit. He had inherited the sturdy middle-aged man's cultivation from the seed of traction technique, and his cultivation had directly increased by a large margin. He was far stronger than before, so he looked at the other middle-aged man and smiled at him. The middle-aged man's expression changed drastically. He wanted to move, but he could not. Chu Li looked at him with a smile, shook his head, and sighed. When you destroyed Taishang Peak, you should have thought that this day would come. As soon as he finished speaking, he sat in front of the middle-aged man and pressed his thumb on him. What followed was the process of the sturdy middle-aged man. First, he planted the seed. Then he used the traction technique to condense the seed and finally passed it on to Chu Li. Because he did not know the formation of the seed, there was no risk. Back then, Gu Sidong was plotted against by Chu Li because Chu Li knew the heart technique of condensing the seed. This was something that Gu Sidong did not expect. Otherwise, he would not have been able to turn the tables and would have definitely died. Chu Li's cultivation increased again, and he also obtained the middle-aged man's heart technique and comprehension, which matched the sturdy middle-aged man's. Comparing their experiences and comprehension, he had a deeper understanding of the various heart techniques of auspicious sect. At the same time, his attainment was also very high. When he used the lucky divine power, he felt a trace of strangeness. Originally, the best way to use his mental energy was the God-punishing thundersword. Now, with this lucky divine power, his mental energy seemed to turn into a large net. After enveloping it, he could sense the other party's state of mind. Chapter 25:19. He sighed. The usage of the traction skill was truly amazing, but he had the Soul Lotus, so he could directly increase his cultivation level. Moreover, through the life and death scripture, he could hang up these techniques one by one so that they would not interfere with each other. There was a major drawback of cultivating too many heart techniques. Some of them were mutually exclusive, such as water and fire. He had the life and death scripture, so he could hang up the other heart techniques through the life and death tree and not let them appear. If others cultivated like him, they would have gone mad long ago. He took a deep breath and frowned as he pondered. It was great to know that Xiao Qi was safe, but he could not sense her. He did not know if she was lucky or unlucky, or if he felt uneasy and could not wait to see her. He looked up at the sky and suddenly formed a seal with both hands. He closed his eyes and began to walk in a strange pace. His white robe fluttered as if he was walking in a strong wind. He began to perform the flying star technique. Thunder rumbled in the sky as if it came from the horizon, far away. The The wind surged and became stronger, turning into a violent gale. Chu Li's white robe stopped and gently stuck to his body. He walked faster and faster until his figure turned into an unpredictable shadow. He could not be seen clearly anymore. Only the strong wind and the faint thunder could be heard. After a while, he suddenly stopped and opened his eyes. A helpless look flashed in his eyes. The flying star technique was activated to the extreme, but he could not predict Xiaoqi's location. Even though he was so close to her, he could not predict Xiaoqi's location. It seemed like she had an amazing treasure on her. Since he could not predict her location, auspicious sex soul tracking secret skill might not work either. He felt helpless but fortunate. He suddenly returned to the place where he fought earlier. Shi Jun was in danger, and his gloomy face became gloomier, as if he was made of iron. His chest rose and fell violently. White steam rose from the top of his head, and the corner of his mouth was stained with blood. He was seriously injured. Chu Li sighed. Shi Jun was indeed a rare person, so naturally he had to save him. After finding out that Xiaoqi was still alive, Chu Li became much friendlier to the disciples of Taishang Peak. Hence, rays of sword energy surged out and directly killed Shi Jun's 4 opponents. Shi Jun sat on the ground and gave a fist salute. "Thank you for your help." After saying this, he was already exhausted. He quickly closed his eyes and began to circulate his energy. Soon after, he felt a wave of pure qi enter his body, gurgling like a spring. His originally empty body suddenly became full, and he recovered his strength. The injuries on his body were also recovering rapidly. The speed of his recovery was unbelievable. Chu Li appeared behind him and slowly raised his palm. Shi Jun opened his eyes, and a sharp glint flashed across them. He turned around and saw that Zhang Xian was so young. A look of surprise flashed across his face, and he clasped his fists. "Thank you. I am Shi Jun of Taishang Peak." Chu Li said. "Chu Li, we're not considered outsiders." "You are?" Shi Jun looked at him in surprise, feeling more and more incredulous. He could sense the purity of Chu Li's inner energy, which was beyond imagination. Even the elders in the peak could not achieve it. Most importantly, Chu Li was so young. Although the people in this world could stay at their peak for a long time and only showed signs of aging when their lifespan was almost exhausted, they could still tell the age of others. Chu Li was obviously a young man. Chu Li said, "Xiaoqi is my wife." An inner peak disciple, junior sister Xiaoqi. Shi Jun exclaimed in surprise. "Your junior sister Zhao's husband?" Chu Li smiled and nodded. Shi Jun said, "Junior sister Xiaoqi ascended from the lower realm. I heard that she ascended to 2 realms, so she's an earth-shattering genius. We also know that she's married and has a husband, but I didn't expect it to be you. Did you ascend too?" Chu Li thought for a while and slowly shook his head. "I came up using a special method. I didn't ascend." He wanted to keep the secret of the Imperial Register a secret, so that his existence could strengthen Xiaoqi's reputation and give others a little fear. If they were to kill Xiaoqi, they would have to think about whether they could withstand his anger. Therefore, he was prepared to kill and make a name for himself to protect Xiaoqi. However, if he lied and said that he had also ascended, he would not be able to withstand investigation because there were different ways of ascension, but it was easy to investigate. The existence of the Imperial Register was rarely known. Shi Jun looked curious, but did not ask any questions. He sighed. "It's a pity. If it was in the past, junior sister Xiaoqi would have the most potential. She might become a peak leader in the future." Chu Li said, "Senior brother Shi, do you know where Xiaoqi is?" Sigh. Shi Jun shook his head and smiled bitterly. "There's a traitor in the peak. They must be hiding in a place that we can't think of, or else the traitor will think of them and chase after them." Chu Li nodded. Shi Jun said, "But brother Chu, you don't have to worry. Junior sister Xiaoqi is highly valued by the peak leader, so he'll definitely think of a way to protect her. The hope of Taishang Peak's revival lies on junior sister Xiaoqi." Chu Li said, "I'm afraid she can't bear such a heavy burden. If a genius like her can't bear the burden of ascending to 2 realms, who can? Jun shook his head and smiled. Brother Chu, don't underestimate junior sister Xiao Qi. Chu Li smiled. This is not a place to stay for long. There are more than 10 masters from auspicious sect on the peak. Senior brother Shi, you should go down a mountain. All right. Jun nodded. Now that he had seen the masters from auspicious sect, he knew that he would only die if he stayed. Moreover, he had already sacrificed a few masters from auspicious sect, so he was content. There was no need to stay any longer. He would keep his life and contribute to junior sister Xiao Qi's revival of Taishang Peak. In front of them, 6 middle-aged men appeared. Their faces were solemn. As soon as they appeared, they attacked with their palms. The corpses scattered around them made them furious, but their palms were still light, elegant, and leisurely as they attacked Chu Li and Shi Jun. There was blood at the corner of Shi Jun's mouth, and he looked even weaker, so the 6 of them turned towards Chu Li. Chu Li had just obtained the 2's cultivation level, so his soul lotus body absorbed it without any hindrance. Such an increase in cultivation level did not cause his cultivation level to become impure. Instead, it became pure. His inner energy was like mercury, rolling around. The sword energy of the Sword of Indifference was like a storm that enveloped the 6 of them. In the blink of an eye, the 6 of them were battered and retreated continuously. However, Chu Li's Sword of Indifference was directly formed above their heads, so even if they retreated, they could not reduce its power. The 6 of them retreated and wanted to escape, but Chu Li locked the void, and they collapsed under the storm-like sword energy. Their protective inner energy was quickly destroyed, and then they were killed by the god-punishing Thunder Sword. Shi Jun was dumbfounded. He felt that this was the true power of the Taishang Divine Sword. He was too weak, so the power was incomparable. At the same time, he was excited. He did not know that the Taishang Divine Sword could achieve such power. As soon as the 6 of them died, another 10 people rushed over and were killed by Chu Li. Just as he was about to start a massacre and make a name for himself, his expression suddenly changed. He sensed Xiao Qi, and at the same time, he sensed that Xiao Qi's condition was not good. He quickly pulled Shi Jun and disappeared without a trace. At the same time, he waved his sleeve, and 20 corpses flew up and fell to the ground one by one. The masters from auspicious sect who rushed oversaw the corpses on the ground and roared at the sky. The word Chu Li was formed by 20 corpses, showing Chu Li's arrogance. Auspicious sect had never encountered such a thing, so they could not accept it and were furious. Chu Li and Shi Jun appeared in a valley. You're tuning into the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.